Would the Secretary of State consider looking at whether boys might need to be taught somewhat differently to girls?
Mr Speaker, I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's interest in this area and the constructive way in which he's approaching what I think is a really important topic. And I too have looked at the research from the Centre for Social Justice, which does provide some important pointers. We will, of course, through the Schools White Paper, consider all ways in which we can better support boys and young men as one group. That, Mr Speaker, is because where it comes to free school meals eligible white British boys, we know that their performance is particularly low. And I have to say that is something that we have inherited from the party opposite.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The logic behind having a women's minister was the idea that women present and have different problems in society. By that logic, men and boys do too. We know about suicide. We've just heard about education attainment. We hear about health-seeking opportunities. Now, I welcome the men's health strategy, but isn't it time we now have a minister for men and boys to be able to look across government to deal with education, unemployment, suicide and health, to really get to grips with the problem facing young men and boys?
Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman raises some important areas of concern, whether it's around health outcomes, around suicide, around educational outcomes, and the need to better support boys, young men and men right throughout their lives. You'll appreciate, Mr Speaker, that matters of ministerial appointments are for the Prime Minister, so I won't be getting ahead of myself and making any announcements today from the dispatch box.
George Simons.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As a boy, Billy Boston dreamed of playing rugby union for Wales and for Cardiff, but he was never selected because he was black. Wigan and Rugby League welcomed him with open arms. And Rugby League has always been a sport that champions equality. It was created by working-class men who wanted to be paid a fair wage. And now, Wigan Warriors women's team have won the Challenge Cup. So will the Secretary of State join me and millions across the North in celebrating Rugby League as a sport that has always judged people by the content of their character and not their race, class or sex, and in congratulating Billy and his family on becoming Sir Billy Boston?
I'm grateful, Mr Speaker, and to my honourable friend for his question. I join in my congratulations to Billy and his family. Right across sport, we do want to make sure that no one is held back by outdated stereotypes, whether that relates to their sex, to their race or to their background. And as a government, we're committed to ensuring that all young people have access to high-quality sport and other opportunities.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As a former A-level teacher, one of the concerns that I had, in addition to the disparities between boys and girls in educational outcome, was the disparity in educational choice. Physics class, maths classes dominated by boys, English literature, psychology dominated by girls. Different subjects that develop different skills. Does the Secretary of State share my concern at that disparity? Does she have any plans to address it?
My honourable friend brings real expertise, and I listened very carefully to what he had to say. We will, of course, consider those issues through the Schools White Paper later this autumn. The Curriculum and Assessment Review is also underway and is considering all aspects of how we can make sure that young people have access to a broad and rich curriculum. But I'd also add that, in addition, we know that poverty is a real barrier for so many of our children, and that's why I'm delighted that this Labour government is expanding free school meals eligibility, lifting 100,000 children out of poverty.
Joe Franklin.
Question number 3, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the Digital Inclusion Action Plan, published in February, sets out plans to widen access to devices, drive digital upskilling, break down barriers to participation and support people in their own communities. The plan highlights disabled people as one of 5 priority groups more likely to be digitally excluded, and so particularly in the focus for the activity.
Joe Franklin.
I thank the Minister for his answer. My constituent contacted me specifically around the Digital Inclusion Action Plan and explained he has a voice disability, spasmodic dysphoria, and as a result he struggles to access essential services like banking because automated phone systems just can't understand his voice. There's often no clear way to bypass these systems, and alternatives like web chat are slow and ineffective. This is a growing issue for many with communication disabilities. What steps is the Minister taking with Cabinet colleagues to ensure services remain accessible, and will this be addressed through the Digital Inclusion Action Plan?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises some very interesting points. The action plan outlines 5 initial actions, including an ambitious digital inclusion innovation fund. Now, I don't know whether there are ideas there that could be taken forward to address the concerns that she's raising. But we do want to be ambitious in all of this, and in the Green Paper, the Pathways to Work, published a couple of months ago, we talked about assistive tech and making that more widely available, and maybe there are some solutions there that could be taken forward. But I'd be very interested to talk to her about what more we might do.
Chris Vince.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to visit Harlow Job Centre and meet the fantastic work coaches there and see the important work they're doing, helping people in Harlow get back into employment. However, digital inclusion was one of the issues they raised. Would the Minister agree with me? Something we need to look at is how we can support people back to work, give them more face-to-face appointments and help provide them with training and digital skills where they need it.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and one important issue is the tech that's available in job centres, making sure that's appropriate for what people need. Part of the action plan is the launch this summer of the IT for Reuse Charter, encouraging organisations to set up device donation schemes, and we think they can play a helpful part as well.
Thank you. Question number 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with women waiting up to 10 years for an endometriosis diagnosis, we are committed to improving the diagnosis, treatment and ongoing care for women with gynecological conditions. This includes approving 2 new pills to treat endometriosis this year, investing £5.6 million into much-needed research and taking action to cut gynecology waiting lists through our elective reform plan. This government is committed to prioritising women's health as we build an NHS fit for the future.
Steve Young.
I'd like to thank the Minister for her answer, and I know that my constituent Samantha, who asked me to raise this question today, will also be grateful for that reply. Further to her response, I wonder if the Minister will also work with colleagues across government to ensure that once the Employment Rights Bill has passed, the needs of those with menstrual health conditions like endometriosis are properly reflected in guidance and employer support, and that organisations such as endometriosis are engaged in this process.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for raising this. Far too many women, like Samantha, are forced to leave work because they don't get the support they need. That's why we're meeting the needs of women with endometriosis in the workplace through a number of measures in the Employment Rights Bill, strengthening statutory sick pay, making flexible working available to more people, and opening up conversations about women's health through employer action plans will benefit all employees managing the condition. We're turning the commitments in the Women's Health Strategy into tangible actions.
Gregory Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What commitment can the Minister give that the Community Diagnostic Centre programme, which was started under the Conservative government, will be... I'll start again, Mr. Speaker. What commitment can the Minister give that the Community Diagnostic Centre programme that was started under the last government will be used effectively to treat and diagnose not just endometriosis, but all of those conditions listed in the Women's Health Strategy?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He will be aware that we are taking forward a number of measures as part of the Women's Health Strategy, and he will also know that as a result of our pilot on women's health hubs, which have established in 41 out of 42 integrated care systems, we are working to make sure that we're supporting women's health and tackling women's health, including shifting care out of hospitals, reducing waiting lists and continuing to engage with local areas to use the learnings from women's health hubs to improve local delivery of services.
Select Committee, Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Women are waiting up to 10 years for diagnosis for endometriosis and adenomyosis. Our Women and Equalities Committee report recommended a maximum of 2 years, which is still a long time to live with intense pain and fertility decline, but it would still be an improvement. Given reproductive health issues cost the UK economy £11 billion a year, the sooner conditions are treated, the sooner women can get on with their lives. Does the Minister agree that investing in women's health is essential? And how is she raising the importance of the Women's Health Strategy with her colleagues, the Health Secretary?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question, and she is absolutely right that we need a focus on women's health. That's why our priority is on turning the commitments in the Women's Health Strategy into tangible actions, such as setting out how we will also eliminate cervical cancer by 2040 through the new cervical cancer plan. We've taken urgent action to support the nearly 600,000 women who are on gynaecology waiting lists through our elective reform plan.
Mr Speaker, 1 in 10 women in Northern Ireland are thought to have endometriosis, with an average wait time for diagnosis an unacceptable 9.5 years. Would you therefore agree with me that there needs to be a UK-wide strategy that equips our NHS with experienced surgeons, fertility experts, mental health support and pain specialists to aid these women who are on the most horrifically painful journey?
I thank the honourable member for raising this, and she is right that it is unacceptable that women can wait up to 10 years for an endometriosis diagnosis. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence's updated guidelines on endometriosis makes firmer recommendations on referral and investigations, and this will also help women receive a diagnosis and effective treatment faster. It's also important that we continue to work across the whole of the UK as closely as we can on this important issue.
Question number 5, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
The honourable member is right to raise this. The current system does trap too many in financial inequality. We want disabled people to have chances in work which others have always taken for granted. We'll invest an additional £1 billion a year by the end of the decade in work, health and skills support.
I've spoken with several disabled constituents who are deeply fearful about the proposed cap to the limited capability for work and work-related activity element of universal credit. Research by Sense shows that 1 in 4 disabled people with complex needs could be pushed into debt if these changes go ahead. Will the Minister and his colleagues in the Department for Work and Pensions review this damaging proposal?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. At the moment, there are 200,000 people out of work on health and disability grounds who'd love to be in a job and say they could be in a job today if they had the support to make that possible for them. We are determined to provide them with that support.
Mr Speaker, as the Minister knows, PIP is a passport benefit for carers allowance. The government's impact assessment suggests approximately 150,000 family carers will lose out due to the proposed changes to the eligibility of PIP. What further analysis have the government done of the financial impacts of welfare reform on family carers?
We are consulting on the support that will be needed for those, perhaps 1 in 10 over the next few years, 1 in 10 of those currently claiming PIP. The support will be needed for those who lose their benefit, and that will include family carers, those who receive carers allowance at the moment.
Irene Campbell.
Mr Speaker, question number 6.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, we are taking firm action across government to deliver our unprecedented ambition to halve violence against women and girls in a decade. This is underpinned by a new government strategy to be published this summer. Last year, we launched new domestic abuse protection orders and set out new measures to tackle stalking. Through the Safer Streets Mission Board and the Vogue Ministerial Group, ministers across government regularly meet to discuss and drive progress.
Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It saddened me to see an article in the Glasgow Times about the rise of sex crimes at Scottish train stations. Sexual abuse compensation advice found that there has been a 45% increase in sex crimes at Scottish stations, with a total of 87 crimes reported in 2024. Does the Minister agree with me that women should be able to use public transport without fear of assault, and could she tell me what her department is doing to tackle issues like this?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for raising this, and she is absolutely right. Everyone should feel safe while on public transport. That's why we've developed an ambitious programme to help make the transport network safe for women and girls. The British Transport Police also uses overt and covert policing techniques to target offenders using the network, promote reporting of sexual offences, and have committed to tackling VOG in their 2025 to 27 policing plan, which with her experience in this area, Mr Speaker, she may be interested to discuss with them.
Mr Jett.
On Friday, my 10-minute rule bill is due for second reading, and it calls for the government to publish a strategy to tackle interpersonal abuse and violence against men and boys. A strategy would ensure that male survivors of crimes considered to be violence against women and girls, like rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, forced marriage and honour-based violence, are given dedicated support, and would also prevent male survivors from having to be in spaces that should be for women. They're currently included within the strategy for women and girls, due to be published this summer. So could the Minister reassure me and those male survivors who are in desperate need of support that the government will introduce a dedicated strategy for men and boys, and if not, why not?
I thank the honourable gentleman for raising his question. This is an issue that does affect women more than women and girls more, but I take the points that he's raised, and it is important that all people get the support that they need, and that I will look forward to looking at his private member's bill closely.
Shadow Minister Saki Bate.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Time and time again, we on this side of the House had asked the government to hold a national statutory inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. Time and time again, the government ministers insisted the 5 local inquiries would be enough, despite there being a suspected 50 towns with grooming gangs operating in them, as reported by Charlie Peters from GB News. So let me ask the Minister today, now after the Casey review and the announcement of the National Commission, what reassurances can she give to victims that the 50 suspected towns will be investigated, and in a town or city which refuses to have an inquiry where there is a suspected grooming gang operating, will the Minister be able to compel the Commission to investigate? Or in other words, does the government have any accountability whatsoever?
Yes. Mr Speaker, the Shadow Minister may not have listened to the statement closely on Monday because that was also confirmed by the Home Secretary. But what the Shadow Minister may want to know is that earlier this year, the Financial Times told us the reality of what went on inside the last government when it came to Alexis Jay's report. They say that Number 10 urged the Home Office ministers to, and I quote, to do more to engage with Alexis and draw up a plan for her recommendations. What one veteran admitted is that the report came at an unfortunate time and was maybe to some extent deprioritised or forgotten. Forgotten or deprioritised, and yet now they have the cheek to lecture this government about the action we're taking to support and protect victims.
Question number 1, please, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm proud to be driving our Opportunity mission as part of this government's plan for change to break the link between background and success. As part of our spending review, we've announced extending free school meals to all children with a parent on universal credit, lifting 100,000 children out of poverty by the end of the Parliament. Mr Speaker, this is the difference a Labour government makes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent Theo, who is blind and a Brailleist, has not received a single usable Braille past paper despite being nearly a year into his A-levels, and reports that his GCSE papers last year contained so many errors they were nearly impossible to use. So will the Minister take immediate action to ensure exam boards fulfil their legal duties under the Equality Act to provide accessible examination materials and urgently review Ofqual's monitoring of...
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm concerned to hear of the honourable gentleman's experience and that of his constituent. If he could provide me with some information, I can make sure that that's properly investigated.
Irene Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was shocked to read recently that Ofsted found 80% of teenage girls are being put under pressure to provide sexual images of themselves, as well as being contacted multiple times a night asking for these pictures. Would the Minister tell me how social media is being considered in a wider strategy which tackles violence against women and girls?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I share her concern about what she's just set out there and about the impact it has on young women and girls. It's why the Science and Technology Secretary is bringing forward further action to make sure that girls are protected from harm, and it's also why later on this year we'll publish updated RSHE guidance to tackle all forms of misogyny and make sure that young men and young women are able to thrive in our country.
Show Secretary of State, Ms Davis.
I point to page 86 of Baroness Casey's report, saying there are a worrying number of live investigations covering an overlap between child sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation, which notes a significant proportion of cases appearing to involve suspects who are claiming asylum. Will the Secretary of State confirm which minister is directly responsible for safeguarding our communities, including those housed in asylum hotels, and going forward, if any individual moves into the community in changed accommodation, if the government managed to close hotels, as they claim, any dangers transferred from hotels to the wider community is accounted for?
Mr Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady will know that the Home Secretary made an extensive statement to Parliament setting out the actions that this government will take to address the many failures left behind by the party opposite. Baroness Casey outlined a decade of lost time, a failure to deliver justice for victims. This government will act. We will root out all forms of child sexual exploitation. We will keep children safe from harm, and we will make sure that perpetrators are finally prosecuted.
Ms Davis.
We know for decades too many people block their ears and turn their backs on towns and individuals asking for help, as well as national calls. Can the Secretary of State confirm those in their ivory towers in Whitehall too can now be compelled to give evidence under oath on their actions and assumptions, vitally including senior civil servants, former Crown Prosecution Service employees and previous directors of public prosecutions?
Mr Speaker, as the Home Secretary set out on Monday, anyone found to have been responsible for covering up or for hiding vile crimes of child sexual abuse must and will be prosecuted. But I would say to the Right Honourable Lady, they had a decade. That was the lost decade that Baroness Casey talked about. The recommendations from Alexis J sat on a shelf and were not acted upon. But this government immediately brought forward the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill to deliver the biggest upgrade in child protection legislation in a generation, which they opposed.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, can I welcome to the gallery the Speaker of Pakistan? And we now come to questions. Adrian Ramsey.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've been asked to reply. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has been attending the G7 summit in Canada. In an era of global instability, we are working with our partners to urge de-escalation in the Middle East, put pressure on Russia to agree to a ceasefire and deliver security renewal for the British people. Mr Speaker, the Air India plane crash last week was devastating. Our thoughts and condolences are with everyone affected by this awful incident, and we're working closely with the Indian authorities to support those in need. And Mr Speaker, 9 years ago we lost our beloved friend and colleague Jo Cox, who is a beacon of positivity and courage, and her legacy lives on. And I must also take this opportunity to also remember Sir David Amos, much missed by the whole of the House. Mr Speaker, this Sunday marks Windrush Day. We celebrate the extraordinary contribution the Windrush generation and their descendants to our country. And Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given the strong consensus across this House on the importance of de-escalation in the deeply worrying conflict between Israel and Iran, does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that the actions of this House must match its words? And will she therefore commit that before any further military support is given to the Israeli government, whether that's the potential deployment of the RAF jets or deployment of armed forces, that her government will first give MPs in this House a free vote?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the situation in the Middle East is fast-moving and deeply concerning. There is a clear potential for significant and rapid worsening of the situation. And every step that we take, we will always be guided by the safety of British nationals and the UK national interest. That's why we've deployed jets to the region so that contingency support is in place for our armed forces personnel, and it's why we're asking British nationals to register their presence, and we'll keep all advice under review.
Olivia Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Too many of my constituents are stuck in unsuitable housing. And after 14 years of inaction from the party opposite, local families are being split up because there are not enough affordable homes. Can I welcome this government's plans to turbocharge the delivery of social and affordable housing, including through the new National Housing Bank, and ask my right honourable friend to confirm that this government will finally give my constituents the security that they deserve?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's absolutely right to talk about the 14 years of failure by the Conservatives. Labour's turning the tide on the housing crisis, and I'm proud to announce today our commitment to establish a new publicly owned National Housing Bank backed by £16 billion of new finance. This includes £2.5 billion, Mr. Speaker, in low-interest loans for social housing to help achieve the biggest uplift to social and affordable housing in a generation.
Shadow Home Secretary Chris Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I associate myself with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about the tragic air crash in India and, of course, what she said about our dear colleagues Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. I also join her in calling for de-escalation between Israel and Iran, while noting everything possible must be done to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition and I met with survivors and family members of the rape gang scandal. Fiona, Teresa, Lucia and Marlon. They told us how authorities deliberately covered up the systematic rape of young girls and some boys by gangs of predominantly Pakistani heritage men. They covered it up because they cared more about so-called community relations than about protecting vulnerable girls. That is disgusting. The survivors told us they will only have confidence in an inquiry if it is independently led, has full statutory powers, covers all 50 towns affected, including Bradford, if those who covered this up are prosecuted, if foreign perpetrators are all deported, if survivors are closely involved, and if it is set up before the summer recess. Can the Deputy Prime Minister give the survivors and their families those assurances?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I thank him for his tone and putting the survivors and victims at the heart of his question here today. I think it's absolutely right that we all look at what's happened over the last couple of decades, the countless reports that we've had, and we look to implement that. He's absolutely right to also talk about the confidence people must have in that independent inquiry. And the member that my friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, spoke about that earlier this week in regards to Baroness Casey's report. So we will take that forward at speed, Mr. Speaker. It will be independent, it will have statutory powers, and we will implement the J report, which was he will have known about as the Shadow Minister in charge at the time, and we'll get on with taking the action. I hope members of his party will take his tone in making sure the whole House put the victims first and we all work together to get to the bottom of it.
Well, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her answer. It is vital that scandals like this are never again covered up because of the racial background of perpetrators. And Baroness Casey's report said people who downplay the ethnic dimension are letting victims down, to use her words. So I do have to raise the language the Prime Minister used in January when he, I'm afraid to say, smeared campaigners as jumping on, quotes, a far-right bandwagon simply for calling for the very inquiry he has now been forced to set up. Standing up for rape victims is not far-right. So will the Deputy Prime Minister apologise for what the Prime Minister said?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I say, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister did not just raise issues but acted on them. He brought the first prosecutions against grooming gangs, called for action to address ethnicity issues in 2012. And the honourable member will know that the data that the previous government collected was inaccurate and not complete. And Casey recognised this, and it's one of the recommendations that we will be taking forward. The Prime Minister made those comments specifically about Tory ministers who sat for years in the government and did absolutely nothing about this scandal.
Smearing campaigners standing up for rape victims as far right is completely unacceptable, and the Prime Minister should never have said that. And I commend his predecessor, the member for Richmond, for the grooming gangs task force he set up, which led to 550 arrests in its first year. Now, Baroness Casey's report also said that a significant number of rape gang perpetrators were non-UK nationals or were asylum seekers, many of whom entered the country illegally. And we know, of course, that most illegal immigrants crossing the Channel are young men, contrary to what the Chief Secretary said last week. So does the Deputy Prime Minister now accept that the small boats crisis is a crisis of public safety as well as a border crisis?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, this is a very serious issue and more needs to be done. Let me update the House. Working with our allies, we've carried out a series of major arrests to tackle smuggling gangs behind this vile trade. In the past month, a ringleader that smuggled almost 4,000 migrants has been jailed for 25 years. We could go further thanks to the law enforcement agreements we struck with Germany, Italy, Serbia and the Balkan states. In stark contrast to the honourable gentleman, he was the man at the heart of the Home Office when immigration soared. We lost control of our borders and spent £700 million of taxpayers' money on persuading just 4 volunteers to be removed from Rwanda. I take no lectures.
If she wants to find out who's lost control of our borders, I suggest she looks to her immediate right. Because ever since the Home Secretary scrapped the Rwanda deterrent before it even started, illegal immigration across the Channel has gone up by over 30%. And so far this year, 2025 has been the worst year in history for illegal immigrants crossing the Channel. That is on her watch. That is down to her government. The Prime Minister is now planning crisis talks with President Macron, finally admitting, in his own words, that the situation is deteriorating. The government's laughable plan to smash the gangs lies in tatters. So will she now at last accept we need a removals deterrent so every single illegal immigrant arriving on these shores is immediately removed? Will she commit to that, yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, if they want to argue that 40,000 arrivals since July 24 are down to the scrapping of the Rwanda scheme, they need to explain why there were more than 43,000 arrivals in the same period starting in July 22 when the Rwanda agreement was in place. It's absolute rubbish, Mr Speaker. They lost control of our borders. We're getting control of our borders. He needs to apologise.
I don't see how she has the brass neck to claim she's got it under control. When the numbers crossing the Channel this year are the highest in history. She asked about the Rwanda deterrent. I'll repeat, she obviously wasn't listening to what I said earlier. The Rwanda scheme never started. And indeed illegal immigrants in Calais said they were...
Order! Order! Just do it. I want to hear the question, and I'm sure our constituents want to hear the question and the answer. Crystal.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Rwanda scheme never started. Illegal immigrants in Calais were saying before the election how much they wanted the Prime Minister to get elected because he would help them get here. When Australia started a similar scheme about 10 years ago, it worked within a few months. Now, Mr Speaker, as a consequence of the government losing control, they are now accommodating growing numbers of illegal immigrants, many of whom cross the Channel, in asylum, hotels and flats. The Home Office's suppliers are now actively offering above-market deals to landlords to get hold of their properties to be used for illegal immigrants. In the meantime, hard-pressed young people here are unable to rent or buy. So why is this government prioritising housing for illegal immigrants above housing for our young people?
So again, Mr Speaker, I gently say to the right honourable member opposite that under their watch, immigration increased fourfold until it reached almost 1 million in a single year. They also created the backlog, 400 hotels, which we've reduced to just over 200 hotels in the first 12 months of us being in government, Mr Speaker. £1 million a day spiffed up the wall because they were so incompetent. We're building the homes that they failed to deliver over 14 years of consecutive failure by their government. They should apologise while we get on with the job of rebuilding Britain.
Goodness me, she's got a cheek. Housing starts in Q4 last year went down. Her mission to rebuild Britain is not going very well. She talks about asylum hotels. She obviously hasn't looked at the most recent numbers. The number of people in asylum hotels was higher in March this year than it was at the time of the last election. And she gave no answer about the priority being given to illegal immigrants over people living here already. Now, Mr Speaker, a Zimbabwean paedophile due for deportation was recently allowed to stay in the UK because a court found he might face, quote, some hostility back in Zimbabwe, apparently breaching his Article 3 rights. What about the rights of children here to be protected from this dangerous paedophile? Who's looking out for their rights? Not the government. There are thousands of cases like this involving foreign criminals. So there is a solution. We need to scrap the Human Rights Act for immigration matters so this sovereign parliament decides on the law our courts apply. But her party voted against that. So I have a simple question. Why did the government side with foreign criminals and not the British public?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, again, Mr Speaker, they had 14 years of failure on these issues. We've also included 4,500 foreign national offenders that have been deported since we came into office, Mr Speaker, more than they did in the same period. I take no lectures from the Johnny-come-lately who couldn't do anything when he was in office.
And Elise Midgley.
Mr Speaker, last Saturday marked 8 years since Grenfell. 8 years fighting for justice. The Hillsborough families, including Margaret Aspinall from Huyton, have campaigned for 36 years for the Hillsborough law. Decades. So can the Deputy Prime Minister tell me today, will this Labour government bring forward the Hillsborough law without delay? Will it honour the promises made to victims of state cover-ups? And will it finally deliver justice for the 97?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her question and for the work with campaigners like Margaret in their fight for justice and for mentioning Grenfell, which of course with the 8th anniversary was not so long ago. We remain fully committed to bringing in a Hillsborough law. The state has failed victims and their families too many times in the past, and that is precisely why our focus is now on getting the legislation right. I can assure her that measures will be brought forward as soon as we're confident that they will deliver, Mr Speaker, the justice victims deserve, and we want to do this at pace.
Daisy Cooper, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of my party, may I associate myself with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about the Air India crash. And in a week when we remember the murder of Joe Cox and David Amis, our party's thoughts are with their friends and families and all those in this House who lost their beloved friends. We also remember those who died in Grenfell tragedy. Mr Speaker, in 2003, we Liberal Democrats were incredibly proud to lead the campaign against the Iraq War. A war in which the UK blindly followed the US in a move which was not backed by the United Nations. In light of reports that President Trump is seriously considering joining the war between Israel and Iran, launching a US strike against Iran's nuclear facilities, can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm that if President Trump does do this, that today's Labour government will not blindly follow the US into war again?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, the one thing I will say is we agree with President Trump that Iran must never have nuclear weapons. But we've been consistent in urging Iran to engage in the diplomatic process and work with the United States, and we continue to support that diplomatic approach.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to the Deputy Prime Minister and we support those efforts. Today, the Government is set to unveil its plans to cut personal independence payments and carers allowance, a prospect which one of my constituents described as terrifying. Liberal Democrat analysis of the government's own data suggests that 1.3 million disabled people are at risk of losing some support. So can the Deputy Prime Minister honestly say, hand on heart, that this is the change that 1 million disabled people and their carers were promised?
Well, Mr Speaker, Labour is the party of work and also the party of fairness and social justice. We've announced the plan to get Britain working again, and we're clear on the principles, Mr Speaker, and I want to be clear on that. Those who want to work should be able to work, and those who can never work should be protected. The current system we've inherited doesn't support those that need that support, and also doesn't allow and enable those to get opportunities for employment. I have personal experience of it. I know what the Honourable Lady is saying. I know how some people are fearful of the changes, but this Labour government put its values into place and will ensure that people are supported into it where they can, and where they can't, they are supported. We are the party of the welfare state, Mr Speaker. We set it up back after the Second World War, and we believe it should be there for people who need it, but we should also help people into work.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I welcome the... Yeah? Mr Speaker, there's too many deputies in the place today. I apologise. Mr Speaker, I welcome the government's announcement on grooming gangs. I'm sorry for stumbling. I've been floored by the point scoring that's going on around them. On all sides. I wonder if, if the Deputy Prime Minister is aware that the victims and survivors of grooming gangs are being denied compensation by the Criminal Injuries Agency on bizarre technicalities. They also deny all children of online abuse compensation. For me, this is a grave injustice, and they think they're better than the judge and jury. So I wonder what the Deputy Prime Minister plans to do, because personally, I think they should be abolished.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is a long-standing advocate for child protection, and I pay tribute to her campaigning on these issues. We share her determination to do what is right for the victims and the survivors, and we recognise that no sum of money can ever fully compensate for the horrors that they've experienced. And we are committed to funding efforts to tackle child sexual abuse in the future and support survivors to rebuilding their lives. And that's why we'll make it easier for victims to make personal injury claims through the civil courts by removing the 3-year time limit. And we're redoubling funding for therapeutic support services.
Carla Daniel.
Mr Speaker, this week is Refugee Week, an opportunity for this House to show solidarity with those fleeing war, persecution and oppression. Compassion and welcome are core British values, but for decades the Home Office has been undermining those values, as my new report, No Way Home, shows, by treating migration as a crime rather than making it work for our communities and for newcomers. So will the Deputy Prime Minister read the report and consider its recommendation to remove migration from the responsibilities of the failing Home Office?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'll commit to reading the Honourable Lady's report, because I think it's important we take all information on these issues. We inherited an asylum system under exceptional strain, which costs up to £9 million per day, and will end the use of hotels through suitable self-sufficient accommodation for asylum seekers, minimising the impact on local communities, and will protect and support asylum seekers when demonstrating value for the taxpayers.
Jodie Gosley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On the 1st of July, Warwickshire County Council will permanently remove one of Nuneaton's 2 fire engines. Their decision is based on dubious data that does not accurately represent the current risk to residents, without accounting for local factors such as high deprivation. The cuts will put Nuneaton's lives in danger. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please look into this matter to confirm there has been sufficient scrutiny and a thorough risk analysis to ensure safety for the good residents of Nuneaton?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue, and I know that the Fire Minister would be happy to discuss this further, and I'm committed to ensuring fire and rescue services across the country have the resources that they need to keep communities safe. The deployment of fire engines, though, is decided locally. So this really is a question for Warwickshire County Council, now led by Reform. So the member for Clacton should have a word with his county councillors in Nuneaton and get them to explain why Reform are cutting fire services.
People short.
Mr Speaker, I remember when the Deputy Prime Minister was a fierce critic of austerity and a proud champion for the disabled. But today, her government is introducing its £5 billion disability cuts bill, which will push another 250,000 people into poverty. Does she agree that everyone has the right to oppose such devastating cuts? So is it the Prime Minister's intention to remove the whip from any Labour MP who does the right thing and votes against these disability cuts?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I gently say to the honourable member that we've given, he talked about austerity, we've given the biggest amount of increase to Scotland. And I've covered this point in an earlier question, Mr Speaker. We're absolutely committed to ending child poverty. We've already introduced free school meals. We're already supporting families. We've given a living wage rise to over millions of workers that need it. We're getting on the job, Mr Speaker, of rebuilding Britain. He's had decades of failure under Scotland. They deserve better.
Jonathan Davis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Derbyshire's Derwent Valley is the home of the Industrial Revolution, and it is also now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That community showed a Victorian sense of purpose which delivered improvements to people's everyday lives. So can my right honourable friend set out how the government's £39 billion investment in housing will instil that same drive while maintaining the unique character of the East Midlands' only UNESCO World Heritage Site?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. I know he's a champion for regeneration across his constituency, and he's working hard to get homes built in his patch for his constituents. Our plan for change will deliver the biggest boost in investment in social and affordable housing in a generation. And for the first time in recent memory, Mr Speaker, we will give providers in his constituency a decade of certainty over the capital funding to build ambitious housing projects that honour Derbyshire's history.
King Timothy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Home Secretary says we should judge her success in smashing the gangs by whether the number of channel crossings falls. But under this government, the numbers are up by more than 30%. Yep. So by which date should we judge the Home Secretary? And if she fails, will she be fired?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, they continually vote against the measures that we're taking to smash the gangs. We're getting on with the job, Mr Speaker, working internationally to disrupt the abhorrent work of these smugglers and gangs, while he harps on from the sideline. He should apologise for their record in government, which was abysmal.
Mr Speaker, since becoming an MP, I've received thousands of pieces of casework from constituents who are stuck on social housing waiting lists. I've recently had an email from a woman with severe mobility issues, effectively trapped in her front room while she waits and waits for suitable social housing. Even when a home becomes available, she'll be forced to compete with other residents because there simply aren't enough affordable options. What will this new funding, the recent funding announced by the government, mean for my constituent and others like her who have already waited too long for a decent home?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, Mr Speaker, for highlighting the case, because it's not an isolated case. We inherited a really dire situation, and there's far too many people that don't have a safe and secure home that meets their needs. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor's announced a record funding, almost double the level provided by the previous government, who ended up handing back the cash for social and affordable homes, and Labour's plan for change, renewing our country and investing in Britain's future.
Other House to Edward Lee.
When the government, quite rightly, gives full and unequivocal support to Israel in its bid to end the scourge of Iran's nuclear weapons programme forever, will the government also work with our allies to try and convince the Israeli government that it's not in the long-term security interests of Israel to carry on with this policy of illegal settlements in the West Bank, which is simply leading to radicalisation and desperation throughout the region? Have not the overwhelming majority of Palestinian people have the right to yearn for peace and security in their own homeland, as the Jews yearn for their homeland for 2,000 years?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Father of the House for his important question. Settler violence and expansion in the West Bank is appalling and completely unacceptable. Alongside our allies, we have sanctioned individuals responsible for inciting this extremist action, but a two-state solution is the only way to bring peace that the Israelis and the Palestinians deserve, and this is only achievable if the hostages are released, aid surged into Gaza and the ceasefire is restored, and we'll do everything we can to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Scotland, over 10,000 children are stuck in temporary accommodation, including many in my constituency of Stirling and Strathallan. Too many families facing soaring rents, long waiting lists and dwindling options. It's just one of so many policy failings that we're all losing count and losing patience as public confidence in the SNP ability to govern collapses. What advice would she have for the Scottish SNP government as they continue to preside over a chronic failure to invest in the social and affordable housing Scotland so desperately needs?
Well, my honourable friend is right, Mr Speaker. Homeless levels are far too high, which has a devastating impact on those affected. Under the SNP, 10,000 children in Scotland shamefully have no fixed home to call their own, a record high. Our decisions have given Scotland a record settlement and the largest since devolution. We saw in Hamilton, Mr Speaker, how Scots are fed up with the SNP's excuses. They've been in power for nearly 2 decades and have nowhere left to hide from their failure.
Anne Davies.
Diolch, Mr Llefarydd. Welsh farmers are taking hit after hit, from Tory trade deals to Labour taxes. And now on top of that, blue tongue restrictions affecting Wales and England will hamper cross-border trade. Over 550 farms on the border and key livestock markets rely on summer trading. Once in a year, opportunities like the Royal Welsh Show are crucial, and the disruption will be devastating. So will the Deputy Prime Minister commit to working with Welsh Government on a scheme to compensate for the losses?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I gently say to the honourable member, you don't deliver for Wales by voting against an extra £1.6 billion for public services like I did at the Senate. We will be making sure that we support Wales and support Welsh farmers, and we'll continue to do that as a UK government.
Andrew Bates.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the spending review last week, the government backed Peterborough with support for our new pool and sports quarter in the city. This commitment has the power to turn years of campaigning into a reality. But that's not all. The government has also recently approved the business case for our new station and given us new police. So can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister, does she agree that this is just the start and that places like Peterborough that were forgotten for too long by the party opposite are now top of this Labour government's agenda?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his comments and flagged by the 2 ladies that have made sure that those things happen. The Chancellor's guaranteed funding to accelerate projects like Peterborough's new sports quarter, including, Mr Speaker, a new Olympic-sized swimming pool. And I can also confirm today that, subject to the business case approval, we will provide nearly £48 million of funding for a new city centre quarter and a refurbished Eastern Station building.
Paul Holmes.
Recently, a small family business in my constituency was burgled by a prolific offender who was serving an 8-month suspended sentence. The man was caught, arrested, charged and appeared at court, where he was given another 8-month suspended sentence and released. The business was offered £200 in compensation. Does the Deputy Prime Minister think that's justice served, or is this government now soft on crime and soft on the causes of crime?
Well, first of all, Mr Speaker, I'm really sorry to hear about that. Hard-working business people that spend a lot of their time building up a business should expect the full force of the law to protect their property and protect their interests. And can I also, while I've got the opportunity, congratulate the honourable member for running Hamble Valley's very first pub competition this year. I hope I'm going to get an invite. But he's absolutely right, Mr Speaker, to say that we've got to have increased police numbers and making sure they're responsive to people's concerns. We're doing that. His government let them down.
Joe Powell.
Mr Speaker, Saturday marked 8 years since 72 people lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower fire. 8 years without justice, but finally the prospect of some systemic change following the public inquiry. So I welcome the government's commitment to barring all the cited companies from accessing public contracts and its full support to the police investigation to deliver real accountability. Can the Deputy Prime Minister also reassure our community that alongside the Hillsborough law, the government will consider some independent oversight so that victims from the Post Office to Hillsborough to Grenfell know inquiry recommendations will actually lead to real change?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. The Grenfell fire was a national tragedy, and we must never forget the 72 lives that were lost, and it was an honour to pay my respects at the 8th anniversary at the weekend. We do remain fully committed to introducing the Hillsborough law, including a legal duty of candour for public services and criminal sanctions for those who refuse to comply. I know my honourable friend speaks with passion and authority on this as I speak to the Grenfell community. I know this is something that they really want to see happen as quickly as possible, and we're exploring reforms to inquiries to get to the truth more quickly and deliver the meaningful change that these victims deserve.
Peter Fortune.
Thank you. Bishop Challoner School has been helping to educate Bromley pupils for nearly 75 years. But it will close its doors in July due to Labour's decision to impose VAT on independent schools. Given the Deputy Prime Minister's well-publicised views on independent schools, does she welcome this closure, or would she like to apologise to the parents, pupils and staff?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I've said for a long time that the taxpayers of this country shouldn't be subsidising tax breaks for private schools. I welcome all schools that give children a great education, but I'm also determined to ensure we've got qualified teachers in every classroom for every child, something their government failed to do.
Alan Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As a trained physics teacher and a former engineering lecturer, can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister what this government is doing to help people improve their maths skills after they have left school? I came across an awful case the other day. A 61-year-old man who believed he'd counted up $7 billion of government spending when there was really only $27 million. What can we do for people like the leader of Reform UK, who evidently can't add up?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend highlights an important fact. Reform sums simply don't add up. He'll be pleased to know that we're investing £136 million for skills boot camps, and I will be sure to send the details to the honourable member for Clapton.
That completes Deputy Prime Minister's questions. We'll let the front bench change over. Now come to the statement. Secretary of State for Transport, Heidi Alexander.
Mr Speaker, with permission, I'd like to make a statement on HS2. As a London councillor over 15 years ago, I remember hearing the then Labour government's bold plans for high-speed rail to link our major cities to address the capacity needs of the future, and in the words of the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown, to join the high-speed revolution sweeping the world. It was a vision of a confident nation, a clear signal our great towns and cities in the Midlands and the North, with potential that had been untapped at best and ignored at worst, could be places of opportunity and aspiration again. That was the promise of HS2. But after a decade and a half of Tory timelines planned then delayed, routes drawn up then cancelled, budgets calculated then blown, promises made then broken, we inherited a project that had lost the trust of the public, that created an image of a Britain woefully unable to deliver big infrastructure projects, and that axed swathes of the country it was originally meant to serve. Phase 1 could end up becoming one of the most expensive railway lines in the world, with projected costs soaring by £37 billion under previous Conservative governments, and £2 billion of taxpayers' money sunk into Phase 2 work before it was cancelled by the previous government. There was also clear evidence of poor management. Despite the 2020 Okavi review advising that government halt construction contracts pending improvements in price and simpler engineering, they pressed ahead regardless. It has been no less than a litany of failure, and today I'm drawing a line in the sand, calling time on years of mismanagement, flawed reporting and ineffective oversight. It means this government will get the job done between Birmingham and London. We won't reinstate cancelled sections we can't afford, but we will do the hard but necessary work to rebuild public trust, and we've not wasted any time. Since July, we have appointed new leadership of HS2 Limited to turn this project around. We've made clear to the new Chief Executive, Mark Wilde, that the priority is building the rest of the railway safely at the lowest reasonable cost, even if this takes longer. We've started the year-long task of fundamentally resetting the project, including commissioning infrastructure expert James Stewart to lead a review into governance and oversight. As part of that reset, we have reduced financial delegations to HS2 Limited, placing a lid on spiralling costs until the reset is complete and we regain confidence. And we've supported Mark Wilde's review of the size and cost of HS2 as an organisation. But today we're going further. Mr. Speaker, I can confirm we've published the landmark James Stewart review and the department's response. The review, commissioned in October of last year by my predecessor, was a tough, independent look at how the Department for Transport and Government delivers major projects. The Government not only welcomes the review, but we have accepted all the recommendations. My department is already delivering on these, specifically across 5 key areas. First, the lack of oversight and scrutiny. Quite simply, there have been too many dark corners for failure to hide in. The Ministerial Task Force, set up to provide oversight of HS2, had inconsistent attendance from key ministers, including the then Transport Secretary and the then Chief Secretary to the Treasury. The Government has re-established the task force with full senior attendance as per the review's recommendations. A new performance programme and shareholder boards will offer much needed oversight and accountability. Secondly, the report highlights HS2 could cost the taxpayer millions more than planned. We'll stop this spiralling any further by delivering all the recommendations on cost control. That starts with HS2 fundamentally changing their approach to estimating costs. It includes certainty over funding, which the spending review has given. And it also means HS2 working with suppliers so their contracts incentivise saving costs for taxpayers. As far as I'm concerned, suppliers should make a better return the more taxpayer money they save. Thirdly, the review identified a deficit in capability and skills, with a fundamental lack of trust between my department and HS2 Limited. I am clear both capability and cultural issues within HS2 must be addressed. The new Chief Executive is already strengthening the organisation, including filling critical gaps in areas such as commercial expertise. And he will be backed by Mike Brown, announced today as the new chair. This is a new era of leadership the project desperately needs, with Mike bringing significant experience as a former TfL commissioner. Mark and Mike were part of the team with me that turned Crossrail into the Elizabeth line. We've done it before and we'll do it again. Fourthly, Euston Station. Between 2019 and 2023, HS2 Limited provided initial designs for Euston Station, coming in almost £2 billion over budget. When asked for a more affordable option, they offered one costing £400 million more than the first attempt. The word affordable was clearly not part of the HS2 lexicon. The combined cost for these two failed designs, which has now been written off, was more than £250 million. What's more, the previous government announced a Euston ministerial task force. Unbelievably, the task force never met. Mr. Speaker, this government recognises Euston's huge potential, and we've already committed funding to start the tunnelling from Old Oak Common to Euston, and we'll set out more details in our 10-year infrastructure strategy. And finally, we will use James Stewart's findings to transform infrastructure delivery across government. Implementing real change in how we deliver infrastructure is not just for the Department for Transport. This government is committed to implementing these recommendations and adopting a new approach to delivering infrastructure, as will be set out in our upcoming 10-year infrastructure strategy. In that spirit, the Prime Minister has also asked the Cabinet Secretary to consider the implications for the civil service and wider public sector of the issues raised in the report, including whether further action or investigation is warranted. Mr. Speaker, we're wasting no time in delivering on this review, and I will update Parliament on our progress through my 6 monthly reports, even if the information is uncomfortable. Because for a government that last week pledged billions in capital investment for new major projects, that believes in the power of transport infrastructure to improve lives and deliver on our plan for change, this level of failure cannot stand. We will learn the lessons of the past 15 years and restore our reputation of delivering world-class infrastructure projects. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken about our inheritance. I've spoken about James Stewart's review. Let me finally turn to Mark Wilde's initial assessment, which lays bare the shocking mismanagement of the project under previous governments. I will place a copy of his interim findings in the library. He stated in no uncertain terms, the overall project with respect to cost, schedule and scope is unsustainable. Based on his advice, I see no route by which trains can be running by 2033 as planned. He reveals costs will continue to increase if not taken in hand, further outstripping the budget set by the previous government. And he cannot be certain that all cost pressures have yet been identified. Mr. Speaker, it gives me no pleasure to deliver news like this. Billions of pounds of taxpayers' money has been wasted by constant scope changes, ineffective contracts and bad management. There are also allegations that parts of the supply chain have been defrauding taxpayers, and I have been clear these need to be investigated rapidly and rigorously. If fraud is proven, the consequences will be felt by all involved. Mr. Speaker, I have to be honest, it's an appalling mess, but it's one we will sort out. We need to set targets which we can confidently deliver, that the public can trust, and that will take time. But rest assured, where there are inefficiencies, we will root them out. Where further ministerial interventions are needed, I will make them without fear or favour. HS2 will finally start delivering on our watch. Mr. Speaker, years of mismanagement and neglect have turned HS2 into a shadow of that vision put forward 15 years ago. But this government was elected on a mandate to restore trust to our politics. That's why we won't shirk away from this challenge and why today we turn the page on infrastructure failures. I can think of no better mission than delivering new economic opportunities, new homes and commercial regeneration of an upskilled supply chain, all of which HS2 can still unlock. But no one should underestimate the scale of the reset required. Passengers and taxpayers deserve new railways the country can be proud of. The work to get HS2 back on track is firmly underway under this government, and I commend this statement to the House.
State Gareth Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for her statement today and for updating the House on the initial findings of the HS2 reviews, and I thank her as well for advance notice and copy of it. On the substance of the Secretary of State's statement, I believe there is broad consensus in this House today on the central point, which is that mistakes were made in the delivery of HS2. As the Secretary of State has noted, costs more than doubled, the project has been repeatedly delayed, and the pandemic completely changed travel patterns, undercutting the assumptions that guided the original plans and caused construction costs to rise sharply across the world, in some cases by up to 40%, as a result of the supply chain shortages as the world emerged from the crisis. It has long been apparent that HS2 was not going according to plan. Mr. Speaker, in my first 2 years as a member of this House, I sat on the Public Accounts Committee, then chaired by the Honourable Lady, the member for Hackney South and Shoreditch. In the summer of 2021, we published a report on HS2 raising serious concerns in a number of areas with recommendations for how to improve the project. In 2023, the previous government conceded that HS2 was not going to plan and made fundamental changes to it, and the result of that was the cancellation of the northern leg of HS2 and the creation of the Network North plan. Under that plan, £36 billion was to be diverted from the northern leg of HS2 to a multitude of transport projects that would benefit more people in more places more quickly than the then government believed the delivery of HS2 could. But we also recognise that the path that we took to reach that point was not perfect, far from it. And I will not today pretend that the Network North plan was not a product of mistakes we made in the handling of HS2, because it clearly was. As a country, we must learn from those mistakes and we must not repeat them. It is on that note, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to express my gratitude to Mark Wilde, the Chief Executive Officer of HS2, for his continued efforts in supporting the delivery of the project. Recognising his leadership in rescuing the Crossrail projects in London, it was the Noble Lord Harper, then the Secretary of State for Transport, who appointed him to lead HS2 in May 2024. We are all encouraged to see him playing a leading role in overseeing the correction and completion of the project, because his experience will be invaluable in helping to get it back on track. I would also like to welcome the appointment of Mike Brown as the new chairman of HS2 Limited. Like the Secretary of State, I know him from my years in London politics when he was Commissioner of Transport for London. He is a very capable man, and I wish him well in his new role. The Secretary of State has informed the House of her intention to accept 89 recommendations from the independent review into HS2. I've not yet seen a copy of this report, which I believe is being released today. While we will need to study these proposals carefully before confirming our support for them, I can assure her that if they offer better value for taxpayers, we will back them. Finally, the Secretary of State has raised very serious concerns that taxpayers may have been defrauded by subcontractors. I would like to assure her that if that proves to be the case, I will share her anger and will support whatever action is necessary to get to the bottom of these allegations. I would request that she keeps the House informed as HS2 and HMRC's investigations progress. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to press the Secretary of State on a number of matters. In recent weeks, several projects have been announced by the government that are either funded by Network North or align with its commitments. However, we have yet to see a clear government commitment to either fully support the Network North plan or to scale it back. So can the Secretary of State now provide a definitive update on which elements will proceed and which will be abandoned? It has been reported that officials are considering a plan backed by the Mayor of Greater Manchester to build, and I quote, an HS2 light track between Birmingham and Crewe. Will she confirm if these reports are true? I would like to conclude by turning to the planning system more generally. The whole House will recall that HS2 grappled with legal challenges, High Court proceedings and judicial reviews, all of which added delay and cost. What assessment has the Secretary of State made of the extent to which legal challenges and judicial reviews delayed the delivery of HS2? How can future infrastructure projects be protected from excessive or politically motivated litigation? And finally, does the Secretary of State believe that sufficient action has been taken to prevent some of the more spurious concerns about such things as bats and newts obstructing future vital infrastructure projects?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his response and indeed for the tone in which he made his comments, and I was pleased to hear him acknowledge that mistakes had been made on HS2 by the previous government. I think he described the path as not being perfect. Mr. Speaker, I would go as far as saying it has been a shambolic mess. He did strike a sombre note in his remarks. I would ask him perhaps to consider going further once he's had the opportunity to read the full James Stewart report, because I do think an apology on the part of the party opposite for the mess that they left this infrastructure scheme in is undoubtedly warranted. I also thank him for the comments he made about the action that HS2 is taking with regard to the alleged fraud within the supply chain, and I can assure him that I will provide appropriate updates to this House on the progress with the HMRC investigation that is now underway. He also asked me to set out our plans for investment in transport in the Midlands and the North. His party, of course, took the decision to cancel HS2 north of Birmingham. They made wild promises about what they would do with the money that they claimed they were saving. He is kidding himself if he thinks that that money ever existed. What this government did last week in the spending review was set out £15.6 billion of money to invest in local transport schemes across the country, be that in Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle. His approach was a fantasy. He promised the moon on the stick and had absolutely no means to deliver. He asked me to set out the government's plans for enhancing rail connectivity further in the Midlands and the North, and I can assure him that further announcements will be being made, both as part of the government's 10-year national infrastructure strategy and beyond that in the weeks and months ahead. He also asked me to opine on the extent to which litigation has caused delays in the delivery of infrastructure project. He will know that through this government's planning and infrastructure bill, we are tackling this issue, limiting the number of judicial reviews and legal challenges that can be made, because unlike his party, this government is serious about delivering infrastructure. We are serious about providing the stable leadership that this country needs when it comes to infrastructure. I looked up before coming to the chamber today the number of rail ministers that existed in the department under his government, and it was the sum total of 18 in 12 years. It's no wonder that projects of like this were left in such a state of disarray. And so let me tell this House that just as this government has returned stability to the nation's economy, we will return common sense and stable leadership to the delivery of the nation's infrastructure too.
Chair of the Select Committee, Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd also like to add my thanks to the Secretary of State for the decisive action that she's taken on addressing the causes of the cost overruns on HS2, and we look forward to having Mark Wilde and the Rail Minister at our committee very shortly. First of all, I actually want to celebrate something that the HS2 leadership should be proud of, and that is the work they've done in skills and workforce innovation. They've provided best practice work across the construction industry and transport projects can and in fact are learning from. But finally, Mr. Speaker, could I urge the Secretary of State to get her department to learn from countries like France and Spain that have managed to deliver extensive high-speed rail projects to time and at a fraction of the cost of HS2 here in the UK.
I thank the Chair of the Transport Committee for her comments, and she is right to recognise the excellent work that HS2 have done on both skills and workforce. We have over 300,000 people working on this project at the moment, and opening up opportunity, be that in apprenticeships to the next generation, opening up opportunities through the supply chain. I think they have done good work on that, and I will heed her advice in learning from other countries about the speed and the ease with which they deliver infrastructure projects.
Paul Kohler, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State
State for her statement and of advanced sight of it. What we've heard today is clearly a damning indictment of Conservative mismanagement. Connecting our largest cities with high-speed rail was meant to help boost economic growth and spread opportunity. The original idea, a high-speed rail network connecting London to Manchester and Leeds, was clearly the right one. However, what we end up with is years of delay and billions of pounds of taxpayers' money being poured down the drain with no end in sight. The litany of errors the Secretary of State has outlined is truly shocking. It shows the Conservatives were comatose at the wheel. A lack of oversight, trust and planning has left us with a high-speed railway drastically reduced in scale and inflated in price. The shocking allegations of fraud by a subcontractor are emblematic of the Tories' lack of oversight and disinterest in properly safeguarding the public interest and public money, as we have already seen in the scandal of PPE procurement during COVID. We must now make sure any money lost to fraud is clawed back as soon as possible. May I ask the Secretary of State three things? Can she guarantee that if any fraud has taken place, any money lost will be returned to the government and her department as soon as possible, and the police provided with the necessary resources to fully investigate the matter? The Secretary of State has said that the ministerial task force set up to provide oversight on HS2 had inconsistent attendance from the then Transport Secretary and Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Does the Secretary of State agree that these right honourable members should apologise for these particularly damning lapses? And thirdly, we share the Secretary of State's confidence in Mark Wilde and Mike Brown, but can she say when she expects to be able to give the House an accurate assessment of the full costs of the scheme and when HS2 will finally be up and running? Thank you.
The honourable gentleman raises three very fair issues, and I agree with his assessment that the previous government weren't just asleep at the wheel, they were comatose at the wheel. He asks whether the alleged fraud that has happened in the supply chain will be fully investigated and whether monies will be returned to the taxpayer. I can assure him that no stone will be left unturned in getting to the bottom of this matter. He's also right to highlight the question of poor and inconsistent attendance by previous individuals who held either my role or the Rail Minister's role and Treasury roles. I think it is imperative that politicians who have oversight for these infrastructure schemes stay close to the detail of what is happening, both through their own officials and directly with the executive and non-executive leadership of the project. That's certainly what I intend to do. I know the Rail Minister has a monthly meeting with the new Chief Executive. We've already held a meeting at the Ministerial Task Force. There's another one due very soon, and I've had multiple one-to-one conversations with the leadership team at HS2. He asks when I will be in a position to provide a full update on costs and schedule. Mark Wilde has told me that he will require until the end of this year to do that full piece of work. I'm not prepared to get ahead of that piece of work because I think that's the way that we've got into problems previously, but he can rest assured that as soon as I do have more information, in addition to the 6-monthly report that I provide to Parliament, I will come back to this House.
Graham Stringer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the latest national scandal in our attempt to bring in infrastructure schemes on budget and on time. But it's not only the taxpayer who is a victim in the failure of this project so far, it's also the people of the north of England. This was originally a scheme that was intended to help the economies of the North West and Yorkshire and those communities on the way with HS2. So there is a complete failure there. And what we're going to be left with is an extension to the London Underground system. That is not going to help people in Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, Sheffield and elsewhere. And I would ask the Secretary of State to consider safeguarding the original routes so when we get our infrastructure plans in place, we can build something that this country can be proud of.
I would just say gently to my honourable friend that I think the Mayor of the West Midlands might have something to say about his great city being seen as the end of an extension to the London Underground line. I think it's completely right that our two great cities, Birmingham and London, are connected with really high quality rail services. And whilst this is a difficult day in terms of exposing the state that the project is in, I have no doubt that in time this will be a railway that we can be proud of. I would also say to him that I am very aware of forecasted capacity constraints between Birmingham and Manchester and in other parts of the country. We are, of course, investing through things like the Transpennine route upgrade and improving connectivity to other great cities in the north of England. And we're determined to ensure that everyone, no matter where they live in the country, has an excellent public transport system that they can rely upon.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency has been devastated by roughly 26 miles of HS2. And I've consistently warned in this House over the last Parliament and this, through the lens of the frankly miserable experience on the ground in Buckinghamshire, of the reasons why there were cost overruns and poor governance and everything else that the Secretary of State has highlighted in her statement today. But if she must persist with this frankly wrong project on a new delay, will she give a commitment to my constituents and the rest of the county of Buckinghamshire how much longer they will have to live in misery as part of a building site? And more importantly than that, look urgently at unlocking some of the mitigation funds that frankly we are finding it incredibly hard to actually access and get spent on the ground as some small, tiny comfort for that human misery my constituents have to live in.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is absolutely essential that we proceed as quickly as possible with the remaining civil engineering works that will have affected his constituents to date. If he wishes to write to me with details of the problem that he has experienced with accessing mitigation funds, I will raise that for him with the Chief Executive of HS2.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Conservatives announced that they were scrapping the northern leg of HS2 in a former railway station, summing up their attitude to the railway industry and sending shockwaves through the industry, including through Derby, a rail city that will be building the HS2 trains. Will the Transport Secretary ensure certainty and timeliness going forward so that the industry can have confidence that we won't see the further delays which have already been so damaging for the supply chain?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that question, and she is right that certainty is critical for the rail supply chain. It will be a number of months before I'm in a position to confirm with any certainty the schedule and estimated final costs, but as soon as the new Chief Executive, Mark Wilde, has provided that information to me and my department, I will be updating the House.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State knows that HS2 runs through my constituency, and she will accept that what makes my constituents particularly angry about what she's described is that if you're unfortunate enough to find yourself in the path of this railway, HS2 has pinched every penny in compensating you and wasted millions elsewhere. So can she assure us that as part of the reset, line drawing, page turning, however she describes it, that will happen now, she will look as part of that at how people are compensated when they are affected by major infrastructure projects such as this? And will she also accept that it would be sensible to look at how Parliament can look again at a project whose budget and timescale has ballooned as this one has, and decide whether it still thinks it's worthwhile use of taxpayers' money?
I think the right honourable gentleman is right to point out that we do have some form as a country in seeking to gold plate infrastructure projects, and I know that the last government talked about this railway being the fastest and the best in the world, and quite frankly I would like this country to do things well and to do things properly. I think the point he raises about compensation is one that any government should keep under review whilst bearing in mind the need to provide value for money to the taxpayer. And I can assure him that I will make sure that any future infrastructure projects that I am overseeing when I am in this role, I will make sure that the House is appropriately updated and we proceed with transparency on the costs and the benefits of the schemes in question.
Callum Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her statement and the candidness with which she's delivered it. The villages that I represent in North Buckinghamshire, be it Toweston or Westbury, Quainton or North Marston, communities that I know the honourable gentleman, the member from Mid Buckinghamshire, will be very familiar with, have for too long faced chaos and disruption from HS2 and their contractors, and news that there will be yet more delay will cause them significant distress. So can she update the House and explain what additional support, practical support, financial or otherwise, her department plans to give rural communities like mine over the years ahead?
I think the biggest reassurance that I could give to my honourable friend is my cast iron commitment to make sure that we proceed as rapidly as possible with completing the remaining construction works, which I know will have had an impact upon his constituents. And whilst I can't commit to further compensation from the dispatch box today, if there are particular problems that his constituents are experiencing, he should not hesitate to bring those to the attention of me and my department.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement this afternoon, and I don't disagree with a word of her analysis of what's gone wrong in the past. The PAC, which I have the honour to chair, has 8 reports, comprehensive reports over the 13 years of this project. There are some common themes throughout those reports. Firstly, that her department, and I'm not in any way blaming her because this is what went on in the past, didn't have the right mix of skills to be able to challenge the assertions of HS2 Limited. Project managers, engineers, people who really know how to build a railway, firstly. Secondly, we found there was, in our report published on the 28th of February, a considerable disagreement between the amount of cost of this railway between HS2 and the department. The highest estimate was the top range of HS2, which was 66 billion in 2019 prices. That's over 80 billion in today's prices. So I think we do need to be assured fairly soon what this is going to cost. And thirdly, I'm not at all surprised that she's had to delay the date when this railway will be complete. But this is the second reset in 5 years. So we really want to see this reset working. And I think the people of this country will be very keen to know in her half-yearly report, if possible before, when this project is likely to be completed. Well done, Geoffrey.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for that contribution. I'd like to thank him and his colleagues on the Public Accounts Committee for the work that they've done over many years on this. He is right to highlight the need for skills within government to act as a strong client to HS2 Limited, and we also need to make sure that we've got the right commercial acumen within HS2 as well, and I know that's something that the Chief Executive is working on. I must disappoint him though. I think it is unlikely that in my next report to Parliament, which I think is due before the summer recess, that I will be able to provide any concrete information on a new schedule, window and a new cost envelope, because I think that work is going to take the Chief Executive towards the end of the year before we're in a position to make that information public.
Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents know more than most the daily misery of HS2 construction, particularly in the villages of Waterorton and Kingsbury and the town of Coleshill, and they will welcome my Right Honourable friend's statement today. I met with the new CEO, Mark Wilde, on Monday to discuss the reset, and I'm delighted that he accepted my invitation to come to Waterorton to the Spud Club and talk to residents there. Does she agree with me, though, that it is time that the dust settles on this project, that we end the failure of oversight, the scandalous overspends and the suggested fraud, and the dust settles on the project rather than it settling on my clients' clean washing, their cars and their clean windows?
My honourable friend paints a graphic picture, and I do understand that when large infrastructure works are happening, then those who live closest to those schemes will often face disruption in their daily lives. And so let me put on record my thanks to the residents in Kingsbury, Coleshill and Morton Orton for their patience with this project. And I agree wholeheartedly with her that we do need to, once and for all, put an end to this cycle of overspends, delays and waste, and get on and build a railway that is fit for the 21st century.
Rayner.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The disastrous decision by the previous Conservative government to stop works at Euston Station dented investor and commuter confidence in our railways and in major infrastructure delivery. Their failure to keep costs under control and to manage the basics of the projects, simple things such as turning up to meetings, has created the quagmire that High Speed 2 finds itself in today, and I do not envy the task of the Minister. I'm glad to hear the Government sees the huge potential of a comprehensive redevelopment of Euston Station, but can the Minister reassure me that we will not end up with a cut-price station that does not realise the potential of the project?
I will provide that assurance to him. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to not only re-provide the existing Euston Station, which will frustrate many colleagues in this House at times and their constituents, I am sure, but also to provide the new HS2 station there and to unlock land around that station, both for the delivery of new homes, but there's a massive commercial regeneration opportunity in the heart of London as well. It's a really exciting opportunity and one that we will be saying more about in the coming weeks.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Delays in HS2 have blighted parts of West London around the main site at Old Oak. Benefits, when they finally arrive, will include a major rail interchange with Great Western and the Elizabeth line. Will the Secretary of State look at opening the Elizabeth line station at Old Oak as soon as is feasible, not waiting for HS2 to begin operations? And will she reclaim some of the goodwill of the people of West London by directing a tiny fraction of the costs of HS2 to the repair of Hammersmith Bridge?
With regard to his question about a possible earlier opening of an Elizabeth line station at Old Oak Common in advance of the HS2 station opening there, I will certainly speak with my colleague, the Rail Minister from the other place, and explore what the opportunities might be, and if I may, write back to him on that subject. He may also have heard in the spending review last week, the Chancellor announced that we are opening and funding a structures fund to enable local authorities who have assets which are very costly to repair to bid to government for help with repairing dilapidated bridges, tunnels, etc. And so I will be saying more about how that fund will operate in due course, and as we have done for many years, I'm sure we will be talking about Hammersmith Bridge again.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for the clarity of her statement. There's vast swathes of Staffordshire that are currently owned by HS2. A third of the village of Hopton is under HS2 ownership. This has an enormous impact on farmers, people who live along the route where there's so many empty houses sit. Can the Secretary of State give my constituents the reassurance that that farmland and those houses will be returned back to farmers and people who want to actually live in those communities?
I will be saying more on the safeguarded land and the directions that apply to the safeguarded land in due course.
Martin Wrigley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for the actions she's taken today. Clearly well necessary, and it sounds like we are on a better track. However, HS2 provides little or nothing to the rail users in the South West, other than the ongoing delays during construction and operation of Old Oak Common. Will the Secretary of State consider funding or prioritising the funding for the critical final phase of the Dawlish rail resilience work that will help businesses and rail users in Devon and Cornwall, and perhaps even in Swindon?
He tempts me into talking about the Dawlish scheme. I must admit this is a topic that I will need to take up with the Rail Minister, and I would be happy to provide a response in writing to him on the merits of that particular scheme.
Dr Ruperhook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for her honest setting out of this latest reset necessitated by the mess the Tories left. As MP for Old Oak Common, I found that this week 8 separate associations across 2 boroughs have banded together to create the Old Oak Alliance to fight for compensation and mitigation as it is. And for them, it will be bitterly disappointed that this is even more prolonged disruption now. I wondered if she might meet with me, or better still, come on a site visit to meet them and see what they're putting up with. Because we're dealing with a company here whose idea of engagement is jam tomorrow and death by PowerPoint.
I'm sure the leadership of HS2 would be very concerned to hear of that description of the way that the project is engaging with local people. That is not what I expect of an infrastructure company, and I'm sure it's not what the Chief Executive of HS2 Limited would want either. I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend.
Esther McVeigh.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The previous government cancelled phase 2 of HS2, and from what the Minister said today, I understood it to be that it remains cancelled and phase 2 of HS2 won't be reinstated. That being the case, can the Minister let me know when the land that is now being safeguarded by HS2, particularly in the mid-Cheshire section, will be lifted?
I'm afraid I can't give the Honourable Lady a date today, but I can assure her that this is an issue that I am fully cognizant of. What we need to look at is whether there is any requirement in future for any future schemes, and as soon as we're in a position to provide updates, I will come back to this House and be sure to provide honourable members with all the relevant information.
Laura Kirkesmith.
Deputy Speaker, the HS2 line runs down the west side of Aylesbury, and it will bring no benefits to Aylesbury at all, I'm afraid. And yet my residents have suffered years of noise, disruption, flooding, loss of access to the countryside and destruction of their natural environment as a result of its construction. I'm pleased that the government is getting a grip on this, and I really commend the Secretary of State for her honesty and her focus on this today. But understandably, my constituents will be concerned at the news of further delays and potential further disruption. So can the Secretary of State confirm that she will do everything in her power to hold HS2 and its contractors to account to minimise the ongoing disruption for my long-suffering residents?
I can assure my honourable friend that we are determined to see the main works civil engineering contracts completed as soon as possible. This, of course, is the element of construction that does generally create most disturbance to local communities, and we are pretty much at peak construction now. I would like to thank her constituents for their patience whilst we continue to deliver this vital new piece of rail infrastructure.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have campaigned against this HS2 project ever since 2010, up and down the line. I never believed the original 35 billion price tag. Furthermore, it only would have benefited rich businessmen and driven businesses from the north of England to London. It would have had the opposite effect. Has the moment not come, rather than having another reset, to recognise this is a failure? Let's scrap HS2. Let's use the tens of billions of pounds we can save in the next decade to upgrade railway lines across the entirety of the United Kingdom to the benefit of many millions, and spend the rest on other national priorities in these financially straitened times. Surely the time has come to scrap the entirety of the project and recognise we've got it wrong.
Yeah.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are not going to be a country that spends over £30 billion on rail infrastructure but then never sees a train running on it. We've already seen too much waste. I'm interested that he is advocating more. We also have significant capacity constraints between Birmingham and London. He seems not to want to do anything about that, but I think those two great cities in our country deserve a railway that's fit for the 21st century. I'm just sorry that he doesn't.
Dave Robertson.
Deputy Speaker, my constituency is the only one in the country which has HS2 Phase 1, Phase 2A and Phase 2B in it. And when we say that the line will not continue north of Birmingham, that is not true, because it will cut through miles of Staffordshire through my constituency north of Birmingham until it rejoins the main line at Handsacre. The failings of HS2 Limited have been clear to my constituents for years. And hearing today what we've always expected and the dereliction of oversight from the previous government is quite frankly shocking. People across Lichfield, Burntwood and the villages will be furious, and they are quite right to do so. Farmers and landowners and businesses in my constituency have been fighting tooth and nail with HS2 for years to just get them to do the job right. Whether it's compulsory purchases that have never been paid, temporary possessions which come with multitudinous back and forth and land agents taking massive fees over things that should have been sorted years ago, crop loss payments that never come, and many, many, many more. The people in Street A have had to deal with ongoing roadworks around a junction which has become far too overcomplicated by trying to put a railway underneath it, have seen the village at times almost cut off. People are absolutely sick of HS2. The failings of that organisation are absolutely multitudinous, and the failings of the party opposite to fully hold it to account should be an embarrassment to them and an embarrassment to this country. I really do welcome a reset, but it has got to lead to meaningful change on this. Can she give me and my constituents any assurances that this will be delivered as quickly as it possibly can be, with as little disruption as we can get away with, and can she finally give us a timeline on when the safeguarded land will be returned to landowners, because it's been going on for far too long.
I share my honourable friend's anger about this issue, and he is a powerful advocate for his constituents and the disruption that they have endured, and I agree entirely with him that it is a dereliction of duty on the part of the previous government, the way that this project was handled. It's why we've appointed new leadership. It's why we are accepting all the recommendations of the James Stewart review, and why we're going through this fundamental reset. As soon as I have received advice from the new Chief Executive about the revised cost and schedule, I will be updating him along with other honourable members of this House.
Dr Andrew Merrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a South West Region MP, would the Minister agree with me that the West Country has for decades been the poor country cousin of our rail network? Agree also that money spent on HS2 is money not spent elsewhere, and do all in her power to ensure that the relatively small changes that are necessary on the network in the South West to make life a lot easier should go ahead, and in particular look at the absolutely woeful West of England line.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think there are challenges across the rail network, and I would readily accept that improvements are needed in many different parts of the country. I wouldn't necessarily accept that the South West is the poor cousin of the rail network, but I can assure him of my determination to make sure that everyone, no matter where they live in this country, has a better rail service at the end of this Parliament than they did at the beginning of it.
Jacob Collier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Transport Secretary will know that my constituents have endured years of disruption and drawn out and poorly managed roadworks as they drive past Lichfield on the A38. Given the billions of pounds that have been squandered by the previous government and this disruption continues, can she say more about how she's going to get a grip on this project to ensure that we have vigorous oversight and that it is delivered effectively and on time for our constituents?
We've appointed new leadership. We are establishing new governance. We are looking at the incentives contained in the contracts on the civil engineering works. We will make sure that there is no stone left unturned in providing value for money for the taxpayer on this, because it's a significant, very significant investment that this country is making, and we do need to ensure that every penny is wisely spent.
Leasehold Roberts.
The costs of HS2 have now spiralled to over £100 billion. Welsh taxpayers are paying dearly for this appalling mess, even though we get no benefits whatsoever. Wales is now owed at least £5 billion. This isn't going to go away. So when will we get our fair share?
The Honourable Lady may have heard that the Chancellor announced in the spending review over £400 million of investment over 10 years in the Welsh railways. That will enable work to take place on the Burn stations in South Wales, at Padeswood Sidings on the North Wales line. This is a significant investment in Welsh railways, the like that hasn't been seen for many, many years.
I'll be calling Steve Darling after Andy MacDonald. Andy MacDonald.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as Shadow Transport Secretary for 4 years, I was wholly supportive of this concept. I just want to correct the member for Clacton, who completely misunderstands the basis of it, because the purpose, I'm sure the Secretary of State will agree with me, was to deliver capacity for the north of England. Speed was a misnomer, but that opportunity has now been lost. I just wonder if she could give me some assurance that with the upgrade to the TransPennine upgrade, that those skills and expertise will be rolled out across the entire north of England, not just the northwest and Yorkshire, but through up until the northeast, to include the continuing rolling programme of electrification. I'm specifically thinking of Northallerton through to Middlesbrough and beyond, because that is where we get the GVA and economic growth from. Can we have some assurance that those ambitions will not be fettered one jot by this damning indictment of the last 15 years of failure?
I can assure my honourable friend that this government 100% recognises the need to improve rail connectivity in the Midlands and the North. He's also right to highlight the need for a pipeline of investment, a stable pipeline, so that the supply chain can plan and we don't lose skills. We've got an ambitious programme as the government on rail, things like East West Rail, as well as the TransPennine route upgrade HS2. And I'm determined that we build on this country's proud railway heritage and make sure that we've got railways moving forward that are fit for the modern day.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And Devon and Cornwall rail network are only one severe storm away from being decapitated at Dawlish. Phase 5 of the South West Rail Resilience Network is desperately needed. When will the Minister come and visit the line to see how desperately needed it is? Thank you.
I do know that Dawlish is a very beautiful part of the country, and so I am very tempted to take him up on his invitation. I know this is the second time in this statement that the issue with the Dawlish programme has been raised. I undertook to his colleague to speak to the Rail Minister about that subject, and I will come back to him in writing at the same time as I do to his colleague.
Nick Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement today. HS2 has been an abject failure of political accountability by the last administration. On transport efficiencies, can I ask the Secretary of State to press on with reforms to the Driving and Vehicle Standards Agency to fix the driving test system to keep our country moving?
We do have a really important programme of work across all the arm's length bodies of the Department for Transport, including DVSA. It is really important that we provide public services in an efficient way and an effective way. And I'm very conscious of perhaps his constituents and those of other honourable members who may be very keen to see rapid progress on driving test wait times, and I can assure him that that is a focus of the discussions that I'm having with the DVSA at present.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. As I too served on the PAC, I welcome the Secretary of State's statement today. I know from that work that whilst HS2 is by far the largest civil infrastructure programme in the United Kingdom, the second largest is the Lower Thames crossing from Tilbury to Gravesend, currently budgeted at about £10 billion. If her tighter approach to HS2 produces savings, is there any way that some of those might be vired to help pay for the Lower Thames crossing? And if not, which private sector companies exactly are going to pay for it? Because so far, I'm afraid, the government has been rather vague on that point.
We are exploring finance options with regard to the Lower Thames crossing. We announced on Monday of this week £590 million of public funding this year to take forward utility works, some land purchases. I will be saying more to this House in future about the private finance arrangements that we are exploring.
Clive Efford.
Deputy Speaker, I commend my right honourable friend on the swift actions that she's taken to try and put right this disastrous situation created by the previous government. The parallels here between the fast-track contracts for PPE can't be ignored. I understand that contracts were signed that appropriate decisions hadn't been made prior to those contracts being signed. Will those people who sign those contracts be interviewed? Will they have to explain why they decided to take these decisions against advice? And will we be getting any of that money back?
As I said in my statement, the Prime Minister has asked the Cabinet Secretary to investigate whether the James Stewart report raises any questions for the civil service or wider public sector. He's completely right to highlight this point about contracts being signed with construction companies even before the scope of the works had been concluded. So it's little wonder that we as a country have ended up paying more when we've signed a contract with a company to deliver works, and yet there was no clarity whatsoever about what the work was that the government wanted them to do. And so this is a dreadful and woeful failing of oversight on the part of previous government ministers, and it's one that I won't allow to happen on my watch.
Lisa Smart.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I was elected to this place, I was a member of HS2's independent panel for the Community and Environment Fund and the Business and Local Economy Fund, and the Secretary of State's statement today makes for some pretty shocking reading. Talk of fraud and of shambolic mismanagement should bring shame on everybody involved in it. One of the problems with HS2 was always the naming of it, focusing on speed rather than on capacity. My Hazel Grove constituents use the West Coast Main Line, and they talk to me about the problems of capacity still remaining. Indeed, I see it every week when I come up and down to work. The Secretary of State has said that she's not reinstating the line from north of Birmingham. She's also talked about Transpennine work that's underway. What specific work is being undertaken by her department looking at capacity on the West Coast Main Line north of Birmingham?
I am aware that the mayors of the West Midlands and Greater Manchester have put some proposals to the government on particularly this issue about the fact that in the mid-2030s we're likely to see severe capacity constraints between Birmingham and Manchester. We're reviewing those proposals, and I hope to be able to say more on that in the months ahead.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and could I thank the Secretary of State for the honesty in which she's addressed these very difficult issues. Madam Deputy Speaker, may I also ask the Secretary of State to say a little bit more about the lessons that can be learnt from the success of the Elizabeth Line, both in terms of the far superior leadership and management in the programme, but also the economic benefits that have been generated, with £18 billion invested in capital, yielding £42 billion of benefits just in the first 3 years of this amazing piece of infrastructure.
I must admit that the delivery of the Elizabeth Line, whilst it was one of my proudest achievements when I was serving as the Deputy Mayor for Transport in London, it wasn't without its challenges as well. I would reflect that the trust that existed ultimately between Transport for London and the delivery project, and the transparency and honesty with which different parts of the system work with one another was one of the final ways in which we got that project over the line. And it was one of the proudest days for me to see Her Former Majesty Queen Elizabeth come and open the Elizabeth line at Paddington shortly before she passed away. There is a lot of learning that we need to take from Crossrail. We are doing that, and we are determined to get on and see this railway opened.
Blake Stevenson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, East West Rail is due to travel through my constituency of Mid Bedfordshire on the historic Marston Vale line. Can the Secretary of State set out how she'll ensure that the mistakes made on HS2, and we've heard some shocking stories today, won't also be made on East West Rail? I'm afraid there's very little confidence in the East West Rail Company, and it's important that my communities are listened to and that we ensure that we deliver this infrastructure faster at lower cost, and that people who are impacted are properly compensated.
The nature of East West Rail is fundamentally different from the construction of HS2. He will know that it has been delivered in 3 phases. It's only the latter phase of that between Bedford and Cambridge which will actually necessitate the construction of new track. I know the Chief Executive of East West Rail, David Hughes, is determined to deliver that scheme rapidly, offering good value for money to the taxpayer and making sure that he properly engages with communities. If there are any particular issues that the Honourable Gentleman is concerned about, he should raise those with me, and I will gladly speak with the leadership there.
Luke Charters.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on Public Accounts Committee I asked HS2 bosses what I thought was a relatively simple question. How much are they spending on newt mitigation? And they could not give an answer. And similarly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can confirm to the House that I have information that suggests that the so-called back tunnel is well north of the purported £100 million in cost. So can I commend the Secretary of State for her leadership that she's shown today, and will she hold HS2 accountable for some of these batshit crazy costs?
I can assure my honourable friend that the estimated cost of the batch structure is £95 million in 2019 prices. And I agree with him that we cannot have a regime of environmental mitigations where this sort of thing continues to happen. The government has put forward significant reforms in this space, and we will continue to monitor the need for further changes so that we can deliver infrastructure in a better way.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome and thank the Secretary of State for giving a candid and transparent statement to this House. In relation to Birmingham, in fact, I'm the only Birmingham MP here, I'm quite surprised. It's going to be disappointing that there's going to be a delay, there's going to be additional costs, but there's always a silver lining in the cloud. Birmingham Peribah, my constituency, has some of the highest unemployment, 17%, 4 times the national average. In addition to that, we have a number of local stations that have been closed. That would improve the network if they were reopened. Would the Secretary of State meet with me to discuss how we can get Birmingham Peribah constituents into jobs and a possibility of opening 3 stations, Handsworth Wood, Soho Road and City Health Campus?
I'd be very happy to ask the Rail Minister to meet with him about those stations in Birmingham that he raises.
Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the statement from the Secretary of State. But may I speak today of the east of England? The member for Richmond famously promised a dividend when he cancelled HS2 North. So can she tell us whether we might expect some of this to replace the crucial Hawley and Ely junctions to finally sort out the rail connections in the east of England?
Very good. I do understand the importance of the Ely area scheme in terms of rail infrastructure, and I do hope to be saying more about rail investments in the weeks before the summer recess.
Joe Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Secretary of State set out what steps she is taking to ensure that infrastructure like the £100 million BAT tunnel won't be included in future projects such as East-West Rail?
I can tell the honourable gentleman that the Planning and Infrastructure Bill includes proposals to reform species and habitats protection, the proposals for environmental delivery plans and the Nature Recovery Fund do enable a shift to protecting the whole population of species rather than a purely local consideration, and this will provide for better outcomes for nature without incurring unreasonable costs like the HS2 BAT mitigation structure.
Tom Morrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for her answer to my honourable friend, the member for Hazel Grove, regarding capacity on the West Coast Main Line, because Stockport is the one place where it's at full capacity, and HS2 was meant to solve this. But now, because of the cancellation of the northern leg, the HS2 trains, we now face the HS2 trains going through Stockport's already packed lines. I welcome the response regarding the plans put forward by the mayors of West Midlands and Greater Manchester. But can I ask, will the Secretary of State commit to engaging with Stockport Council on those plans? Because we do need to find a solution to this capacity issue, because it could hold my borough back for decades.
Yeah.
I am very conscious of the need to invest in improved public transport in Stockport, and if the council would like to write to me with any relevant information, I will gladly consider it. I'd also point out to him the good news that the announcement a couple of weeks ago about our investment in transport for the city regions holds for Stockport, with the extension of the metro link to there, which I hope he will welcome as good news for his constituents.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It may surprise her, but I actually have some sympathy with the Secretary of State for inheriting the HS2 nightmare. But when she receives the updated budget and timeframe, is there a cost and a timeline at which point she says enough is enough, it's better to stop, or is it an open-ended chequebook?
If the honourable gentleman had actually bothered to read the spending review last week, he will have seen that we have committed £25 billion over the next 4 years. That enables work to be taken forward, and I will be, as I have said on a number of occasions in this session, updating the House when I have further information available about both the overall cost envelope, the estimated final cost at completion, and the anticipated schedule.
Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With a decade of delay and costs spiralling to eye-watering sums of anywhere between £60 and £100 billion, and now with credible allegations of fraud within the supply chain, can I ask the Secretary of State what steps the government will be taking to recover hard-working taxpayers' money from fraud, hold those responsible to account, and announce a final stop of waste of money?
I've said on a number of occasions, Madam Deputy Speaker, that billions of pounds of taxpayers' money has been wasted by constant scope changes, ineffective contracts and bad management. That is what this reset of HS2 is all about. It's why we've appointed the new leadership, and it's why we're fundamentally changing the governance structures. As I said in answer to previous questions, the matter about potential fraud in the supply chain is being investigated by HMRC, and we will be providing updates to the House as and when further information is available.
That concludes the statements. Point of order, John MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to raise again the case of Alaa Abdi El Fattah, who's the British Egyptian citizen who's still imprisoned in Egypt. His mother has been on hunger strike for a large period of time now. Is in St Thomas's Hospital, and her health is deteriorating. I wonder if we could ask the Treasury bench now to take a message back to the Prime Minister that we need to do everything we possibly can to secure Alaa's release, because I fear that we may well lose the life of his mother, Layla Sweef. One initiative that could be tried again is a joint initiative, a joint approach by our Prime Minister with President Macron to President Sisi to urge the release of Alaa. I think we're in a dangerous moment at the moment. The government has undertaken a number of actions, and the Prime Minister committed to doing all in his power, and he has approached President Sisi. But I just feel we need to make at least another last attempt, both to secure the release of Allah and also to secure the life of his mother.
I thank the honourable member for his point of order and for notice of it. He's put his point on the record, but I am sure that his concerns will have been heard by the Treasury bench. Presentation of Bill, Secretary Liz Kendall.
Universal Credit and Personal Independence Payment Bill.
Second reading, what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. I call Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about the definition of qualifying tenants for the purposes of claiming a right to manage, to reduce the proportion of qualifying tenants required to give notice of a claim to acquire a right to manage, to establish a duty on freeholders to assist a right to manage company in establishing contact with leaseholders within the freeholder's property, to make provision about establishing a presumption in favour of a right to manage in certain circumstances before the first-tier tribunal, to require the Secretary of State to review procedures for converting leasehold property into commonhold property and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, I stand in this chamber today to speak on a topic which matters dearly to all of us in this House: accountability and representation. As legislators, our job is to hold legislation to account and to ensure that it represents our constituents' interests, and it is the role of our constituents, in turn, to hold us to account whenever elections rise. And at this moment, I would like to thank my constituents for joining us here today to listen. Accountability is at the heart of our consumer relationships, with standards and competition embedded into commercial law. And it is a key part of our social contract. When someone in a position of power does wrong, there needs to be a system of recourse. When it comes to housing, however, this too often goes out of the window. Frequently, there exists a stark gap between those who provide our housing and those who live in it, alongside an accountability deficit, whether in private renting, social housing, or in the sector this bill seeks to remedy today, leasehold. Mr. Speaker, my constituency has the highest proportion of leaseholders in the country. Apologies, Madam Deputy Speaker. For too long, they have had to endure a system which leaves them without full control over their homes and at the mercy of a wide range of bad actors. I was proud to be elected on a manifesto which promised to ban the sale of new leasehold properties and to make commonhold the default tenure across the land. Since the election, the government has acted with speed in this area, inheriting a rushed piece of legislation from their predecessors and untangling it with speed, setting out our plans for reform, publishing a white paper on commonhold and expediting moves such as the recent reforms to the right to manage. These have already had a positive impact in the cities of London and Westminster. Constituents have written to me saying that they submitted right to manage applications on the 3rd of March this year as the government's changes allowed them to do so. I join them in thanking this government for acting so quickly in this area to look forward with interest to the publication of the Leasehold and Commonhold Reform Bill later this year. One of the most visible consequences of the leasehold system is the scourge of unscrupulous managing agents. For the past 6 months, I have been coordinating action alongside the Honourable Member for Hendon as co-chairs of Labour for Leaseholders, an alliance of 150 Labour Party colleagues against some of the worst performing actors in this sector. Many of the members supporting this bill today have been tirelessly advocating in this campaign for leaseholders in their constituencies and nationwide, and I pay tribute to this work. In this work, we have heard stories of residents suffering at the hands of managing agents as they fail to conduct essential repairs, engage in threatening and abusive behaviour towards residents, and even run off with hundreds of thousands of pounds of leaseholders' money, all while providing little justification for their service and often for the high fees that they charge. I have also in this process met the most dedicated leaseholders, organisers who have collected testimony from thousands of neighbours to highlight poor practice, accountants who have volunteered their time to scrutinise invoices and auditing processes, and lawyers who have provided free advice to other buildings going through the first-tier tribunal. However, without a legal system which supports them, these leaseholders remain unable to seek the accountability they deserve from a distant and disinterested managing agents. These include my constituents in Neville House, shared owners who pay £5,000 a year in service charges for services not delivered for 20 years, reports of mould being ignored for months, and stuck between their social landlord, managing agent and a freeholder in a complex cladding case. They include the residents of Sheldon Square who have managing agents ignore sewage leaking into their flats, who have been billed for damage caused by contractors to their building and received threatening letters posted to individual leaseholders in flagrant breaches of data protection. And they include the residents of Oxford and Cambridge mansions who have had their managing agent and freeholder ignore reports of gross misconduct against building staff, fail to action against leaks for persisting for years, and ignore reports of damp and mould emerging from flats which they themselves owned and were using as storage rooms, all the while complex major works loom with an opaque tendering process which may cost residents millions. Ultimately, this situation amounts to one of accountability and representation. In most cases, managing agents do not feel a need to represent leaseholders' interests, and the only accountability they have is to the building's freeholder, who far too often take little interest in residents' welfare. But there are a few ways out of this situation, and one is acquiring the right to manage. This involves forming a right to manage association, recruiting half of the flats in their block to join, and submitting an application to their landlord, who can then accept or drag leaseholders through the first-tier tribunal. However, there are multiple loopholes and hurdles obstructing leaseholders from achieving even this basic step. Properties cannot have over a certain percentage of square footage of commercial space, and sometimes even flower beds or communal car parks get included in this. Even when large numbers of residents are in favour of getting the right to manage and no one in the building is opposed, hitting the 50% threshold can be difficult. This is due to a number of reasons, from owners who do not reside in the properties to freeholders who retain a large number of flats in the building to let out privately, or, as mentioned previously, as storage rooms. Today's motion goes some way to rectifying this. Firstly, it would lower the threshold required for a successful right to manage application from 50% of qualifying leaseholders to 35%. As many campaigners have pointed out to me, this alone is not enough. This is why the motion redefines who is defined as a qualifying tenant during a right to manage application, to those who actually respond either positively or negatively when tenants are asked to vote. To put it simply, it changes the threshold for a right to manage claim from can you find a majority of the flat owners in your building to do enough of the actual leaseholders in your block want this to go ahead. Yeah. It addresses a number of other issues too, most notably establishing a duty for freeholders to assist the right to manage company when it contacts their fellow leaseholders, and establishing a presumption in favour of leaseholders on occasions when freeholders counterclaim at the first-tier tribunal. Madam Deputy Speaker, this motion does not go all the way to fixing the right to manage, and a number of obstacles will still remain, particularly in mixed-use developments. There are no quick fixes in the right to manage, common hold or any other reforms to the fact that managing blocks of flats will always remain challenging and will lead to difficult debates within buildings as to how to manage complex and expensive works. But what matters is that the companies who manage these buildings are accountable and represent fairly the people who live in these buildings. And through reinvigorating the right to manage, we can do this. Leaseholders across the country are ready to take this step in holding their managing agents to account. All they need is for the law to be on their side.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
I will.
Can you read the names of the sponsors as well, please?
Lizzie Collins, Dr. Becky Cooper, Deirdre Costigan, Emily Darlington, Marcia de Cordova, Anna Dixon, Amanda Hack, Jane Kirkham, Uma Kumaran, Sarah Russell, Yuan Yang.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you. Right to manage and leasehold bill.
Second reading, what day?
4th of July.
The 4th of July. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Crime and policing bill, as amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be further considered.
Now.
We will begin with new clause 2, with which it will be convenient to consider other new clauses and amendments as listed on the selection paper. I call Tonia Antoniazzi to move new clause 2.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was proud to have stood on a manifesto pledge to halve violence against women and girls in a decade, and I know colleagues on the front bench take this extremely seriously. There are significant measures in this bill on intimate image abuse, stalking, spiking and the sexual exploitation of children, and I know these mark only the beginning of the government's mission to tackle these shameful crimes. As a national inquiry into child sexual exploitation perpetrated by grooming gangs rightly gets underway, we must now also confront the adult sexual exploitation being perpetrated on an industrial scale by pimping websites and men who pay for sex, both of whom currently enjoy near total legal impunity. Laws against the commercial sexual exploitation of adults in this country are outdated, unjust and totally ineffective. In fact, our current legal framework creates a conducive context for commercial sexual exploitation, a failing that overwhelmingly affects women. Pimping websites which function as massive online brothels operate openly and freely, supercharging the sex trafficking trade by making it easier and quicker for exploiters to advertise their victims. These online mega brothels make millions of pounds every year by advertising thousands of vulnerable women from across the world for prostitution in the UK, and sadly our legislation allows this. Men who pay for sex, so often left out of conversations on prostitution and sex trafficking, but who are the beating heart of this brutal trade, abuse with impunity. Their demand and their money drives the sex trafficking trade, yet we are doing very little to deter them. So let us start that process today by making it crystal clear as a Parliament that it is not possible to buy sexual consent. Giving someone money, accommodation, goods or services in exchange for sex acts is sexual exploitation and abuse. It is never acceptable and we need to change that. I will.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and commend her for bringing this forward and the party for bringing it forward as well. The Honourable Lady is probably very well aware that we in Northern Ireland, through Lord Morrow, through the Assembly some time back, had brought in legislation specifically, the first time in the United Kingdom, for that to happen. Has the Honourable Lady had an opportunity to look at that legislative change we had at Stormont? Because I think what the Honourable Lady is bringing forward today is more, even better than what we had originally tried to get at the old Stormont at the Assembly. And does the Honourable Lady feel, in all honesty, that women will be protected from sex exploitation, as very, very clearly, as she has said, that they should be?
Member for his contribution, because he's right to say that there is excellent good practice in Northern Ireland, which is something that my select committee is actually looking at the moment, and which he may be interested in as well. What we currently have, however... Yes.
Thank her for giving way. Why should we implement this model on the on sex work when the evidence from the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland shows that it has increased violence towards sex workers?
Well, I think it's very obvious that the honourable member and myself don't actually look at it through the same lens. For me, it's prostitution and not sex work. So I think we need more, or we need to see some more examples of that actually being used. Because what we currently have, however, is a situation where sex buyers enjoy near total impunity, while the vulnerable women they exploit can face criminal sanctions if they solicit on the street. The state hands out fines to women in a self-defeating effort to stop them soliciting on the street, ignoring the question of where these women are most likely to earn the money to pay their fine. Sanctioning victims of sexual exploitation is counterproductive and a barrier to seeking help and exiting this ruthless trade. That is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have tabled amendments NC2, NC3 and NC4. NC2 would make it a criminal offence to enable or profit from the prostitution of another person, online and offline, thereby outlawing dangerous pimping websites that are fuelling demand and facilitating sex trafficking. NC3 and NC4 would together shift the burden of criminality off victims of sexual exploitation and on to perpetrators. NC3 would make it a criminal offence to pay for sex, sending a clear message to boys that this is not an acceptable way to treat women, and sending an equally clear message to men considering paying for sex that you face prosecution. We know from research with UK sex buyers that this would be an effective deterrent. Over half of 1,200 sex buyers questioned in one study said themselves that they would definitely, probably or possibly change their behaviour if a law was introduced that made it a crime to pay for sex. NC4 would repeal sanctions against victims of sexual exploitation soliciting on the street in order to remove this barrier to women exiting prostitution and rebuilding their lives. It is also widely agreed that the expunging of criminal records of Section 1 offences is necessary to end the unjust stigmatisation that these women continue to experience. And that is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have also tabled NC 19 to this bill to introduce a mechanism for that. The Home Affairs Select Committee has recommended that the Home Office should change existing legislation so that soliciting is no longer an offence, and legislate for the deletion of previous convictions and cautions for prostitution from the record of sex workers by amending the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. For most of these women, their record of convictions is a record of their exploitation and abuse, and they live in fear of having to disclose this history when applying for jobs or volunteering. Decriminalising Section 1 offences and allowing for the expunging of these historical convictions would allow these women to finally be free of the record of their abuse and the stigma they have endured for decades. My amendments, Madam Deputy Speaker, would usher in a legal framework that recognises prostitution is violence against women, and the only way to end this violence is to deter the perpetrators and profiteers. I am delighted, Madam Deputy Speaker, then that over 50 honourable members of this House have signed NC2 to NC4. I would like to thank in particular members of the APPG on commercial sexual exploitation, which I chair, for their support. The amendments are informed and supported by survivors and best practice frontline support services like NIA, Kairos, Women Working Together and Women at the Well. I note that, unsurprisingly, some of my proposals are hated by pimping websites, one of which, Viva Street, emailed its allies urging them to mobilise against my amendments. A recent Sky News investigation found that over half of the 14,000 prostitution adverts on Viva Street displayed a phone number linked to another advert on the site. A key red flag for organised sexual exploitation. I find it reassuring then, Madam Deputy Speaker, that these prostitution peddlers are unnerved by my proposals. However, I want to address a myth promoted by defenders of pimping websites that shutting down these sites will make no difference to the scale of sexual exploitation taking place. Instead, simply driving it all into the dark web and making it harder to identify. This is patently nonsense, lacking logic and evidence. The dark web carries major disadvantages for both traffickers and sex buyers. It would require significant technical expertise to post as well as locate and access prostitution adverts on the dark web, thereby substantially restricting the pool of exploiters able to engage in this crime.
There is also no evidence this shift has taken place in jurisdictions that have outlawed pimping websites. The reality is, Madam Deputy Speaker, right now, police simply can't keep up with the scale of sexual exploitation taking place via pimping websites on the open web. Another myth I want to address was all too visible in the written submissions opposing my amendments submitted to this Bill's committee. Every single one of the organisations who argued pimping websites should be allowed to operate described prostitution as work, as quote-unquote sex work. The idea that paying someone to perform sex acts is an ordinary consumer activity, that ordering a woman online to perform a blowjob is the equivalent of ordering a cappuccino, is a pernicious and harmful myth. Prostitution is, Madam Deputy Speaker, violence against women. Let's legislate to put pimps and traffickers out of business. We must protect individuals from exploitation today, but also address the historic criminalisation of victims in abuse. And I would like to thank the front bench for their engagement on this issue, and I look forward to working with them very closely. Thank you.
Commercial sexual exploitation by a third party.
The question is that new clause 2 be read a second time. I call Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak to two new clauses in my name, new clauses 12 and 123, and the new clauses in the name of the Honourable Gentleman from Tunbridge Wells, new clause 43, and the new clause in the name of my right honourable friend from Gosport, new clause 121. If I can start with those new clauses. New clause 43 is a clause that seeks to commence the Sex-Based Harassment in Public Act. Now, this was an act that was taken through as a private member's bill by the Honourable Gentleman's predecessor, Greg Clark. Greg did great work on this bill, and I was a member of both, a supporter of the private member's bill, but also a member of the bill committee. I spoke in second reading and third reading and spoke on the bill committee. And it's a very simple act that had entirely cross-party support. This was not in any way a controversial piece of legislation. It was in many ways correcting an oversight in the law that hadn't yet been that had been missed out on a previous piece of legislation. But the problem, of course, as often happens with private members' bills, is it needs a statutory instrument to commence it, and that statutory instrument has not yet been brought forward to this House. I'm sure the Minister is well aware of that and is looking to do so. But this new clause would allow the commencement of that Act to start now, rather than needing that statutory instrument, thereby saving her a little bit of time. And I hope she might therefore look favourably on this. As I say, this was an Act that was really supported across party. There was no division on it. It was very much something we all wanted to see, and I really do hope, therefore, that the Government accepts the new clause and that the Honourable Gentleman from Tunbridge Wells can follow on in the footsteps of his predecessor in making sure that this Act of Parliament becomes live and real for the people who need it. Turning to new clause 121 in the name of my right honourable friend from Gosport. This is a clause which I have supported and was almost disappointed not to be able to table myself, because it's something that fits in terms of the work I've done previously on these issues. As Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport in the Digital Economy Bill, we brought in the age verification for pornography, for example. And this is a simple piece of legislation, again, which would mean that non-fatal strangulation was a criminal act if in pornography. This is not impacting on what people may wish to do in their private lives, but it does mean that those images would not then be available to be seen in pornographic films. And it means that there is protection for children who may be looking at this pornography. We don't want them to look at it, but we're realists, we recognise this happens, and it would mean that this doesn't normalise something which is a really dangerous act and really should not be being promoted in any way. And I know from experience that social media companies will remove content if it is illegal. They won't remove it if it's not. So this simple change would mean that this would become illegal content and social media companies would be forced to act. I can hope that this would be something that across the House we could support, and that whilst I understand there will be a push to a division this evening, I do hope that the Minister can say something about the government introducing something similar perhaps in the other place, so that we can make sure that this very, very inappropriate content is illegal and not therefore available to be seen by children. Turning to the new clauses in my name, I want to start with new clause 123. And the reason I'm starting with new clause 123 is that actually it's my honourable friend from Meriden in Solihull East who's been such a champion of this legislation, but I know he has to go to a DL at 2:30. So I want to make sure I speak to it, and also to wish him a very happy birthday, because he is choosing to spend his birthday in this chamber and doing DLs. What a hero he is.
Good man.
But this new clause, again, I think should have and will have cross-party support. It is the removal of parental responsibility for individuals convicted of sexual offences against children. Now, when I've talked about this to colleagues and asked for them to consider supporting this, there's been utter amazement that anybody convicted of a sexual offence against a child may be allowed to have parental responsibility for their own child. It's only the case that it's stopped if the offence is committed against their own child. Now, this simply cannot be right. How can we possibly, in a situation where a convicted sex offender, somebody who has been convicted of an offence, a sexual offence against a child, is then allowed to make parental decisions about their own children? And my honourable friend's constituent who has talked about this, and Bethan, who I believe is the name that we use in this situation, has been a real champion on this issue, because in this case, a man who was convicted of raping a relative who was a child still has parental responsibility for his own child. This cannot be acceptable. And again, it feels to me like it's a piece of legislation where at some point we failed to just address this one issue. So I hope that it can be seen as I think it is, a defect in the legislation that we all agree should be corrected. I now move on to new clause 12, which stands in my name. This is, again, a relatively simple amendment to the Modern Slavery Act, but it reflects a phenomenon that we simply didn't know about when we introduced the Modern Slavery Act 10 years ago, and I was the Bill Minister on that Act. I remember taking things through and going through many definitions of what constituted trafficking and exploitation, but at the time the phenomenon of orphanage trafficking was simply not known. Now, this is something which will perhaps be a shock to some in this chamber, because it's something that is more and more awareness of it in Australia and New Zealand, but we simply don't know about it here. And it is the phenomenon where institutions are set up. They are not orphanages. When we think of orphanages, we think that this is where children with no parents go to be looked after because the state simply doesn't have any other way of looking after them. And in this country and across the Western world, we don't want to put children into institutions like that. We want children to be in family-based settings. We want to make sure they're fostered and that they have the right support. But orphanages exist around the world, and in the case of these orphanages, they're not orphanages. Over 80% of the children are not orphans. They have been put into these institutions, which are simply not registered with the authorities or anything else, to raise money. They are simply about raising money. And the Walk Free Foundation, they estimate that there are 5.4 million children globally living in these institutions. And this is something that's an absolute horror. When this is put to people, and it's suggested 5 million children, who over 80% of whom have parents, have been taken from their parents purely to raise money, there is utter disbelief. How can this possibly be the situation today? But it's estimated that, for example, the Christian Church in the United States gives $3.3 billion a year to institutions to look after children, and they are not orphanages. They are simply there to raise money. And imagine being on a cruise around Southeast Asia, and one of your excursions, as has happened and did happen to a friend of mine, and I will talk about her in a moment, and one of the excursions is to go and view the orphanage, read stories to the children, pay money for the privilege of going to read a story to the children. How cruel is that? Just think about it. This is a child who has been put in this institution. Perhaps their families believed they were going to be put there for a better life, for an education. I don't blame the families necessarily, but these children are there simply to raise money. And busload of tourists turn up and they sit down and read a story to these children. They're kind Western people and they give money, and then these poor children are left. These children don't have any further contact with these people. It might be gap year students who decide they're going to spend a little bit of their gap year working in one of these institutions, and they're in South America, Africa, Southeast Asia. It's across the world. And those young people are doing what they believe is the right thing. Voluntourism, I believe it's called. They're doing what they believe is the right thing. But actually they're being exploited because these children are there simply to raise money. So my amendment changes the Modern Slavery Act. It adds one further definition into Section 3, which is the section that has definition of exploitation, and it adds the definition of modern slavery exploitation, orphanage trafficking, to that act. It would just mean that we, in our legislation, would reflect orphanage trafficking within the law. And I think there's more we would need to do, but this is a simple first step to make sure that it is recognised. And that would mean then that we'd be raising awareness, but also individuals and organisations that wish to give money to these orphanages would potentially be in breach of the Modern Slavery Act, and that steps could be taken against them. Now, I wouldn't wish to criminalise anyone who's doing their best and wants to do right for people, but I do think it's important we do that. We would also be only the second country in the world to mark this, and the only other country who has legislated for this is Australia, and that's where I want to pay tribute to Linda Reynolds, who was a senator. I think she's just stopped being a senator, but she's an absolutely incredible woman, and she took up this issue, and she has gone round the world with it. She's forced the legislative change in Australia, but she's also taken it up with the Interparliamentary Union, and the IPU, as a result of this, has issued a lawmaker's guide to stopping orphanage trafficking and has passed motions and resolutions around this to raise awareness of this. And Linda Reynolds is absolutely the hero on this issue, and she went to one of these orphanages herself, and she said, she walked away saying, this isn't right. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like an authentic place. These children don't seem to be being looked after. This doesn't seem to be something that I want to support. So I asked the Minister, again, I believe this is not a new clause that will be selected for separate decision today, but I asked the Minister if she could, in her summing up, reflect on steps the government may take and whether the government might consider bringing this back again in the other place. I will bring forward private members' bills. I will continue to amend the legislation on this issue, and I hope that at some point the government will be able to get the collective responsibility agreement that they need, and that we can reflect this heinous crime in our legislation. Thank you.
Yeah. I call Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I really appreciate it. And I also really appreciate following in the wake created by my two friends who have been incredible campaigners on these issues. And I know from first-hand experience of meeting the victims and survivors that they speak about that there are gaping holes in our legislation. And I hope the House supports their amendments because they would do something to close those. But I rise to speak first about my new clauses 9, 10 and 18, which would seek to better protect child victims of sexual and criminal exploitation and empower our frontline responders to keep them safe. I welcome the government's introduction of mandatory duty to report, which was ICSA's recommendation 13, as it has the potential to strengthen our child protection system. However, following detailed conversations and meetings with Rotherham and Sheffield NHS safeguarding staff, I share their concerns about the finer details of its implementation. Put it bluntly, this duty will not protect children as intended unless mandated reporters are adequately trained. Recognising, reporting and crucially responding to child sexual abuse is far from straightforward. To prevent overwhelming an already strained system, all those under the duty must be trained to know what to look for and how to report it. Let me give an example. A nursery nurse may see bruising around the genital areas of a toddler, and with the fear, I put it that way, of mandatory reporting and her duty to do that, she will report it in to the hotline or directly to the NHS safeguarding teams. Absolutely the right thing to do. However, toddlers fall over and they fall in awkward places. So that nursery worker needs to have the skills and experience to be able to know when it is appropriate and when it is not appropriate, what evidence to gather, what not to. Because at the moment, I'm scared that everything gets reported in and the system there to protect and safeguard those children won't be able to cope. And so I hope that a standard training package is given to all people that fall under this duty. I now turn to new clause 10 and 18 on child criminal exploitation, CCE, and it's something I know the Minister of Safeguarding is very familiar with, having campaigned with her on it for many years in the previous parliaments. As Baroness Casey's report said, right now, criminally exploited children are at risk of prosecution rather than protection. My amendments seek to change that and have the backing for Action for Children, ECPAT UK, Barnardo's and many other children's charities. In 2024 alone, over 2,891 children were referred to the National Referral Mechanism as potential child victims of criminal exploitation. But many, many more ended up in courtrooms, not safeguarding systems. As my police chief said to me, it's deeply sad that the first time we see these criminally exploited children is when we're looking to criminalise them. We're not able to get above this and ahead of it. Clause 38 of the bill rightly creates a new offence of CCE, recognising the severity of this abuse. However, without the corresponding changes to the Modern Slavery Act 2015, legal protections remain inconsistent and inadequate, something my new clause 10 seeks to fix. In a similar vein, new clause 18 inserts a definition of child criminal exploitation alongside the offence in clause 28. Evidence from the J Review into criminal exploitation of children demonstrates that the current lack of a definition contributes to significant inconsistencies in practice across the country and persistent failures to identify children as victims. This is something that I saw time and time again in Rotherham, with young, exploited girls all too often referred to as child prostitutes and not given the support that they needed. This shift only started after we got the statutory definition for child sexual exploitation. Clear, consistent legislation empowers professionals to intervene earlier, prevents inappropriate prosecutions, and ensures that exploited children receive the safeguarding support they need. I now turn to my Amendment 9 on registered sex offenders, supported by 39 cross-party MPs. This will not be new to many in the House, as I brought it up under the last three parliaments. 11,500 sex offenders were prosecuted for failure to notify changes of information between 2019 and 2022. The same ongoing pattern allows offenders to slip through the cracks, with over 700 going completely missing in those years. I welcome new measures in the bill, which require some offenders to seek police authorisation before applying to change their name on UK passports and driving licences. This would genuinely make a difference, and I do genuinely welcome it. However, I remain deeply concerned that many of the new measures lack strength and could also lead to confusion. Clause 80 states that sex offenders must give 7 days' notice of using a new name, but does not define what using means. My Amendment 9 seeks to provide much-needed clarity. It will require offenders to notify the police of an intention to change their name 7 days before doing so by deed poll. This would allow vital time for the authorities to conduct appropriate risk assessments. But more than this, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to draw attention to the fact that this bill still relies too heavily on a sex offender to do the right thing, something they rarely do. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I speak in my capacity as Chair of the International Development Select Committee. I speak to my new clauses 99 and 100. Last week, my committee published our report on international humanitarian law. It is vital that those responsible for attacks on aid workers and unlawful blockages of humanitarian assistance are brought to justice. Throughout the inquiry, it became apparent that the UK needed the powers to exercise universal jurisdiction over the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. There must be no safe haven for those who commit such heinous crimes. My new clauses allow the relevant authorities to prosecute people suspected of these crimes without any requirement for a connection to the UK. At a time when the legitimacy and impartiality of some international courts is being questioned, the UK must stand firm in support of these important mechanisms for accountability to prevent impunity for serious violations of international humanitarian law, whilst also ensuring that it has the domestic powers needed to hold perpetrators to account, no matter where their crimes are committed. Thank you.
I call Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak to new clause 5 in my name and that of my honourable friends around the House in different political positions. Before I do that, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do have a moment where I want to congratulate the government, unusual from the opposition, but I'm congratulating them anyway. I think the honourable lady will know what I'm about to do, which is talk about the inclusion of the cuckooing amendment, which was moved in the last Parliament, in which the government were in discussions, the honourable lady particularly, have passported through, as it were, to this, and is now a criminal offence. This will hugely help those who are taken over in their houses, the vulnerable, the elderly, and where crimes are committed from those houses. It will give the police, frankly, now a reason to go in without absolutely explicit knowledge of the crime that's being committed other than the cuckooing. So, to that extent, I do thank the government for making that now a law, and will go through, hopefully, without too much problem in the other place, and I appreciate that enormously, and many others do. Can I just say that I'm rising on new clause 5, which is consequential, really, on an amendment which, again, I would thank the government for doing, which is on cycling, reckless and dangerous cycling, which there were no offences that were relevant to this, and people had been killed and had been injured in the course of bad behaviour on the roads by cyclists, and one particular, Matt Briggs, who was campaigning for this, and who's the reason why I brought that forward. Now, the government has accepted that, and that is now bound in again to this legislation. However, there was some issue really at the same time about the danger and problem of e-bikes. Now, we know that if you talk to the police, e-bikes are now becoming responsible for some of the worst crimes on the streets, which is antisocial behaviour, but threatening behaviour as well. And because they're silent and because they can creep up on people rather quickly, you'll find a lot of those things that were being snatched by motorised scooters or whatever are now using e-bikes to do this. Now, for 1 second, move away from those that are illegal. I want to come back to that in a second. But the legal e-bikes are as much of a problem in the way that they are failed to be prosecuted by the police. The problem is that they, like the cycles, were not included in any relevant legislation that allowed them to be prosecuted for the offences that they commit, dangerous, reckless, etc., that would be normal for bicycles. The interesting thing about this really is that they are a growing huge problem. E-bikes in 2022, there were 462 pedestrian casualties in the UK resulting from collisions with pedal cycles, including e-bikes. Recent data indicates 11,266 incidents involving e-bikes and e-scooters in 2023-24, an increase from 10,000 incidents in the previous year. And while this rise partly reflects the growing number of riders, it also highlights concerns regarding the reckless behaviour of a number of those users. E-bike riders are approximately 57% more likely to be involved in accidents compared to traditional cyclists. And the injury severity, e-bikes accidents are nearly twice as likely to cause severe injuries and nearly twice as likely